Hey guys, tonight we are going to step into a time machine and witness the birth of a terrifying new power. Imagine, we are standing on a vast, wind-swept plain. The ground beneath your boots is hard as iron, ringing with every step you take. The wind here isn't just moving air, it's a physical assault, a razor-edged knife that cuts through layers of fur and skin, seeking the heat of your blood. Before you lies a landscape of blinding white and slate gray, stretching endlessly toward a horizon that feels too close, curved by the sheer weight of the atmosphere. You are standing directly on top of what will one day be Central Park in New York City, but there are no skyscrapers here. There is only ice, a sheet of it, 1 mile thick, crushing the bedrock with the weight of continents. But in that darkness, a faint light appears. It's not a star, and it's not the sun. It's a flicker of orange against the blue-black snow, a campfire. Around it huddle figures that look strangely familiar. They are shivering, they are hungry, and they are terrified. These are your ancestors. But they aren't alone. In the shadows just beyond the firelight, there are other eyes watching, eyes that belong to creatures of immense size and power, and eyes that belong to other human species that are now lost to time. Over millions of years, this frozen hellscape has acted as a forge. It has hammered the weakness out of our biology, burned away the unnecessary, and tempered a strange new ape into the ultimate survivor. This cold world witnessed the rise of art, the birth of gods, the invention of war, and the extinction of giants. It forged the very mind you are using to listen to me right now. So what secrets does this ice hold? How did a hairless, clawless primate survive when the woolly mammoth could not? And what happened to the other human species who shared this frozen earth with us? Thanks to breakthroughs in genetics, geology, and archaeology, tonight we will venture into these depths together to find the answers. Frankly, if you were dropped here without a survival guide or a very thick parka, you wouldn't survive a single second to realize where you went wrong. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. That small click sends a big signal to the algorithm. That long-form, serious educational content still matters. And to me, it's an incredibly meaningful show of support. Thank you so much for helping keep this channel going strong. It always fascinates me to see where you're all tuning in from. Let me know in the comments where you are in the world and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward, the snow crunching loudly underfoot, a sound that seems dangerously loud in the silence of the Pleistocene. It is a silence so profound it feels heavy, broken only by the groaning of the glaciers shifting miles away, a sound like the earth itself is grinding its teeth. You might think you know what cold is because you've waited for a bus in January or skied a weekend in the Alps. You don't? This is a primordial cold, a caloric thief that demands thousands of calories a day just to keep your heart beating. This is the Quaternary glaciation. Now, when most people hear Ice Age, they think of a specific movie with a squirrel chasing a nut, or they imagine a single frozen event that happened once and then went away. But here is the first reality check of the night. You are currently in an ice age. Right now. The definition of an ice age is simply a period in Earth's history where there is permanent ice at the poles. Since Antarctica and Greenland are still frozen, for now, We are technically just enjoying a temporary ceasefire called an interglacial. We are living in a brief, warm holiday within a brutal, icy epoch that has lasted for the better part of 2.5 million years. As you walk across this frozen expanse, you aren't just walking on water, you are walking on a library. Beneath your feet, trapped in layers of compacted snow, is the atmospheric history of our planet. This brings us to one of the most stunning pieces of scientific evidence we have: the ice cores from Vostok Station in Antarctica. Scientists there have drilled over 3 kilometers down, pulling up cylinders of ice that look like glass rods. Inside these rods are tiny trapped bubbles of ancient air, time capsules perfectly preserved from the past. By analyzing these bubbles, we can taste the air from 800,000 years ago. We can see exactly how much carbon dioxide was in the atmosphere, how much dust was blowing around, and exactly when the world froze and when it thawed. It's the ultimate receipt for Earth's climate history, and it tells us that the world you are used to, the world of agriculture, cities, and beaches, is actually the anomaly. The world of ice is the rule. The environment here is essentially a giant freezer, and like any good freezer, it preserves your leftovers indefinitely. This leads to some macabre discoveries. In the high Arctic, we don't just find bones, we find mummies, created by the cold. There is a quirky, slightly grim reality to dying in the Ice Age. You don't really disappear. Scavengers might scatter your bones, but if the ice takes you, you remain. We have found mammoths with buttercups still fresh in their stomachs, frozen mid-digestion. We have found ancient bison that still have their fur and musculature intact, so well preserved that some particularly adventurous or insane scientists have actually cooked and eaten stew made from 30,000-year-old meat. They reported it was tough and earthy, which is a polite way of saying it probably tasted like freezer burn and history. But the most important thing to understand as you stand here, shivering in the imaginary wind, is that you are not the only kind of human trying to survive this. This is a point that historians and anthropologists still argue over: the definition of humanity itself. In schools, we often learn a linear progression: monkey, slightly less hairy monkey, caveman. Us. But the Ice Age wasn't a straight line, it was a crowded house. When we say human in this story, we aren't just talking about Homo sapiens, people who look like you and me. We are talking about the genus Homo. At this moment in the narrative, the Earth is populated by multiple distinct species of humans, all running the same survival race, but with different strategies. There are the stocky, powerful Neanderthals in Europe, masters of the ambush. There are the elusive Denisovans in Asia, ghosts we know only by their DNA. There are the tiny, hobbit-like people on the islands of Indonesia, and the upright wanderers, Homo erectus, who have already been traveling for 1 million years. They are all human. They all love, fear, bleed, and freeze. And as the temperature drops and the ice sheets expand, forcing everyone closer to the equator, these different versions of humanity are on a collision course. The stage is set. The curtain is made of ice, and it has just slammed down. The world is hostile, the resources are scarce, and the competition is fierce. To understand how we won, or perhaps how we simply outlasted the others, we first need to understand the engine that is driving this chaos. We need to look up from the snow and look at the sky, because the reason you are freezing isn't happening here on Earth. It's happening in space. We are going to zoom out now. Leave the frozen tundra, leave the shivering hominids, and pull back until the Earth is just a marble suspended in the dark. From up here, the silence is absolute, but the motion is constant. You are looking at a giant blue top spinning in the void, and like any top that's slowing down, it wobbles. This wobble is the heartbeat of the Ice Age. It's a mechanism so precise, so grand in its scale, that it feels like the inner workings of a celestial clock. These are the Milankovitch cycles, named after the Serbian mathematician Milutin Milankovic, who figured this out in the trenches of World War I, presumably while wondering why it was so cold. He realized that Earth's journey around the sun isn't a steady, perfect cruise. It's a messy, rhythmic dance that changes over thousands of years. Think of the Earth not as a stable rock, but as a guest at a wedding who has had a few too many drinks. First, there's the path the Earth takes around the sun. We usually picture a perfect circle, but it's not. It stretches. Sometimes the orbit is nearly circular, and sometimes it gets pulled into an oval or an ellipse. This is called eccentricity. When the orbit is more oval, the Earth wanders further away from the sun for part of the year, receiving less solar energy. This cycle takes about 100,000 years to pulse from round to oval and back again. Then, there's the tilt. You know the Earth is tilted on its axis. That's why we have seasons. But this tilt isn't fixed. It rocks back and forth like a cradle, shifting between 22.1 and 24.5 degrees. This is obliquity. It takes about 41,000 years to rock back and forth. When the tilt is less severe, the seasons are milder. Summers aren't quite as hot, and winters aren't quite as cold. You might think mild winters prevent ice ages, but it's actually the mild summers that are the killer. If the summer isn't hot enough to melt all the snow that fell in winter, that snow stays. Then more snow falls on top of it the next winter, and the next. Layer by layer, year by year, the snow compacts into ice, and the glaciers begin to march. Finally, there's precession. This is the wobble. As the Earth spins, its axis traces a circle in the sky, like the handle of a spinning top. Right now, our North Pole points toward Polaris, the North Star. But in 12,000 years, it will point toward the star Vega. This wobble changes when, in our orbit, the seasons happen. Imagine these three cycles, eccentricity, obliquity, and precession, as three different sine waves on a cosmic DJ's mixing board. Most of the time, they cancel each other out or create average chaos. But every now and then, the beat drops. The cycles align perfectly to minimize the sunlight hitting the northern hemisphere during the summer. When that happens, the snow doesn't melt. It reflects the sunlight back into space. This is the albedo effect. It's a brutal positive feedback loop. The white ice acts like a giant mirror, bouncing heat away from the planet, which makes the planet colder, which grows more ice, which creates a bigger mirror. Once this engine starts, it is incredibly hard to stop. The ice sheets grow miles thick, crushing forests, grinding mountains into dust, and locking up the world's water. We have the scientific receipts for this too. Deep-sea sediment cores confirm it. Tiny marine creatures called foraminifera build their shells out of calcium carbonate, and the oxygen in those shells comes from the ocean water. When the world freezes, the lighter oxygen isotopes get trapped in the ice sheets on land, leaving the heavy isotopes in the ocean. By measuring the ratio of oxygen isotopes in these microscopic fossil shells, we can see the rhythm of the ice ages matching the rhythm of the Earth's orbit almost perfectly. But there is a mystery here that still keeps geologists awake at night. It's called the 100,000-year problem. For a long time, The ice ages followed the 41,000-year cycle of the tilt. Then, about 1 million years ago, something broke. The climate shifted gears. The ice ages started getting much longer, deeper and more intense, pulsing every 100,000 years instead. Historians and climatologists still argue whether this was caused by a drop in atmospheric CO2 or some other geological shift, but the result was clear. The environment for our ancestors became drastically more unstable. The Earth became a harsh pendulum, swinging between warm, lush interglacials and long, brutal freezes. This instability is key. If the weather had stayed nice and tropical, our ancestors might have happily stayed in the trees, eating figs and grooming each other. But the climate refused to let them get comfortable. It forced them to move, to adapt, to solve problems. In a very real way, the wobble of the Earth created the pressure cooker that cooked up the human brain. So, the celestial gears turn, the sunlight dims, and the ice descends. And as it does, it pulls a magic trick on the geography of the planet. It makes the oceans disappear. Now, I want you to close your eyes and imagine we are going for a walk. We are walking from London to Amsterdam. No, we aren't taking a ferry, and we aren't swimming. We are walking. You look to your left, and instead of the grey waves of the North Sea, you see a lush, rolling valley teeming with deer. You look to your right, and you see a massive river winding its way through the landscape, a river that is actually the combined flow of the Thames and the Rhine, married together before they ever reach the ocean. Welcome to the bottom of the English Channel, or rather, welcome to Doggerland. When the celestial clockwork we just talked about locks all that water up in ice sheets, it has to come from somewhere. It comes from the oceans. During the peak of the Ice Age, global sea levels plummet by a staggering 120 meters. That is a 40-story building of water. Gone. Vanished. Stacked up on top of Canada and Scandinavia. The result is a map of Earth that looks like a fantasy novel. If you were an alien cartographer looking down at Earth 20,000 years ago, you wouldn't recognize it. The continents look bloated, swollen, and connected. The British Isles aren't isles at all. They are just the highlands of a massive European peninsula. This region, Doggerland, was likely the richest hunting ground in Europe, a prehistoric paradise of wetlands and forests that is now completely drowned under cold salt water. This is a quirky tidbit that blows my mind. Modern Dutch fishermen, trawling the bottom of the North Sea for cod or sole, regularly pull up garbage in their nets. But it's not garbage. They drag up rusty brown mammoth tusks, skulls of woolly rhinos, and sometimes tools made of bone and antler. They are literally fishing up the lost world of our ancestors. It's the closest thing we have to a real-life Atlantis. Except the inhabitants weren't high-tech philosophers. They were cold-hardened hunters, chasing reindeer across what is now a shipping lane. But Europe isn't the only place getting a makeover. Fly halfway across the world to Southeast Asia. Today, Thailand, Malaysia, Sumatra, Java, and Borneo are a fragmented puzzle of islands and peninsulas. But drain 120 meters of water, and that puzzle snaps together into a continent-sized landmass called Sundaland. You could walk from Vietnam to Indonesia without getting your feet wet. This vast tropical savanna was a superhighway for animals and early humans, allowing them to push deep into the Pacific in a way that is impossible today without boats. Further south, Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania merge into a single dry, hulking continent known as Sahul. And up north, the most famous bridge of them all emerges from the freezing mist, Beringia. We often call Beringia a land bridge, which makes it sound like a narrow walkway or a pier. It wasn't. It was a subcontinent, 1,000 miles wide, with its own unique ecosystem of grasses and wildflowers. It connected Siberia to Alaska, stitching the old world to the new. It wasn't just a bridge, it was a destination, a place where people lived for thousands of years, blocked by walls of ice from moving further south, just waiting for the door to open. Scientific evidence for this alien geography comes from bathymetry, the underwater mapping of the ocean floor. We can trace the ghostly outlines of ancient river valleys that continue far out onto the continental shelves. We can see where waterfalls once cascaded off ledges that are now deep underwater. We can even find freshwater peat and tree stumps preserved in the salt water, silent witnesses to a time when the surf was miles away. This shifting map is crucial to our story because it changes the rules of the game. For millions of years, oceans were barriers. In the Ice Age, they became bridges. The lower sea levels unlocked doors that had been bolted shut, inviting the bold and the desperate to walk into new worlds. But before we can cross those bridges, we have to understand who is doing the walking. We have to rewind the clock even further, back before the ice took hold, to see where we came from. We need to go back to a warmer, wetter world, to meet a cousin of ours who is about to have a very bad day. We are going to hit the rewind button on our time machine one more time. We're pushing back past the deep freeze, past the glaciers, landing roughly 3 to 4 million years ago in the Pliocene epoch. The air feels different here. It's heavy, humid, and smells of wet earth and rotting fruit. You are in East Africa, but it's not the dry, golden savanna you see in nature documentaries today. It's a mosaic, thick ribbons of dense jungle broken up by patches of woodland and open grass. Meet your great-grandmother, a few million times removed. Let's call her Lucy, the most famous Australopithecus afarensis. If you met her face to face, you might be a little confused. She stands only about 3.5 feet tall. She's covered in hair, her face is prognathic, jutting forward like an ape's, and her brain is about the size of a grapefruit. If you saw her in a zoo, you'd swear she was a chimpanzee. But watch her move. She doesn't knuckle walk. She stands up, wobbly but determined, and walks on 2 legs. Lucy is living through a slow-motion apocalypse. The global climate is beginning the long cooling trend that will eventually crash into the Ice Age. As the planet cools, water gets locked up in the poles, and Africa gets drier. The lush, safe canopies of the rainforest are shrinking. The trees are pulling back like a receding tide, leaving behind vast, terrifying oceans of tall grass. For an ape, the ground is a nightmare. The ground is where the leopards are. The ground is where the hyenas are. But Lucy has a problem. The fruit trees are now islands separated by miles of dangerous open terrain. To eat, she has to commute. This environmental squeeze puts a premium on efficiency. And here is where we find our mainstream historical fact for the section. Walking on 2 legs is essentially a superpower of efficiency. A chimp moving on 4 legs burns a massive amount of energy. It's like driving a Hummer in low gear. But the human stride? It's an inverted pendulum. We catch ourselves with every step. It is incredibly calorie efficient. By standing up, Lucy can travel farther on the same amount of food than any other ape. She isn't the strongest creature on the plains, but she is the Prius of the Pliocene. But why did we stand up in the first place? This is a massive, open, scholarly debate. Some anthropologists argue for the provisioning hypothesis, that we stood up to free our hands to carry food back to our mates and offspring. It's a nice, romantic idea of the prehistoric breadwinner. But there is another theory that fits the cooling world much better. The radiator theory. Imagine you are a furry animal on the equator at noon. If you are on all fours, the sun is beating down on your entire back. A huge surface area absorbing heat. Plus, the air near the ground is stagnant and hot. But if you stand up, suddenly only the top of your head and shoulders are exposed to the sun. You've reduced your solar footprint by 60%. Even better, your body is lifted up into the breeze, where the air is cooler. Standing up might not have been about carrying groceries. It might have been about not dying of heat stroke as the forests disappeared. We have a haunting piece of scientific evidence that freezes this moment in time. In Laietali, Tanzania, a volcano erupted about 3.6 million years ago, coating the ground in ash. Then it rained, turning the ash into a cement-like mud. 3 individuals, likely Australopithecus, walked across it. You can see their footprints today. You can see where they slipped a little in the mud. You can see that one was smaller, perhaps walking in the footsteps of the larger one. There are no knuckle marks, just the bipedal stride of a creature walking away from the safety of the trees and into an uncertain future. This transition is crucial because it sets the biological stage for the Ice Age. The cooling world forced us to stand up, which changed our pelvis, which changed how we give birth, making it much harder and more dangerous, which meant our babies had to be born uncooked, helpless and with soft skulls, so they could fit through the birth canal. This helplessness meant we had to form strong social bonds to protect them. It's a domino effect. The drying climate broke the ape blueprint and forced us to build a new one. But Australopithecus was just the prototype. She was the beta version. She never left Africa. She stayed near the shrinking trees, caught between 2 worlds. As the climate cycle deepened and the true ice ages began to pulse, nature decided it needed an upgrade. It needed something taller, faster, and smarter. It needed a wanderer. Meet the first true traveler. If you saw Australopithecus on the subway, you'd call animal control. But if you saw Homo erectus on the subway, you might just wonder why that tall, athletic guy needs a shave and a shower. This is the moment the prototype becomes a product. You are standing on the savannah again, but the vibe has changed. You are taller now, much taller. The thick coat of fur that covered your ancestors is gone, replaced by naked, sweaty skin. And you are running. Not sprinting, but jogging. A steady, rhythmic lope that feels like you could keep it up forever. Ahead of you, a kudu is panting, stumbling, frothing at the mouth. It's faster than you in a sprint, but it has a fatal flaw. It can't pant while it gallops. It overheats. You, with your hairless skin and millions of sweat glands, are a biological radiator. You are the Terminator of the Pleistocene. You don't need to be faster than your prey. You just need to be inevitable. This is persistence hunting, and it is the first time a predator has weaponized endurance. In your hand, you are clutching the greatest piece of technology the world has ever seen. It's not a stick or a rough rock. It is a masterpiece of symmetry. This is the Aeolian hand axe. It's a stone shaped like a teardrop, chipped carefully on both sides to form a razor-sharp edge all the way around. It is the Swiss army knife of the Paleolithic. You use it to dig for tubers, to chop wood, to break open bones for marrow, and occasionally to discourage a rival. Getty Images. But here is the quirky tidbit that drives archaeologists crazy. This tool was too perfect. Once Homo erectus figured out this teardrop design, they stopped innovating. For over 1 million years, Let me repeat that. 1,000,000 years, the design barely changed. Imagine if we invented the iPhone 1 and then just kept making the exact same phone with no updates until the year 1,002,025. It suggests a mind that is incredibly capable of learning a complex skill, but perhaps lacks that spark of restless creativity that defines us later on. It's a cultural stasis that seems almost alien to our modern obsession with new and improved. Despite their lack of R&D funding, Erectus was a powerhouse. We know this because of a spectacular piece of scientific evidence found near Lake Turkana in Kenya. The Turkana boy. He's a nearly complete skeleton of a young male, about 1.6 million years old. If he had lived to adulthood, he would have been over 6 feet tall. His legs are long, his hips are narrow. He is built for the road. His anatomy screams walker. And walk they did. This is the main theme of their existence: wanderlust. Without maps, without boats, and without knowing what lay over the horizon, Homo erectus walked out of Africa. They didn't just step over the border. They conquered the old world. They made it to the frosty mountains of Georgia, the country, not the state, where we find the famous Dmanisi skulls. They walked all the way to China. They walked to the jungles of Java in Indonesia. Historians still argue whether this migration was a conscious exploration, I wonder what's over that hill, or simply a slow, unconscious drift caused by following migrating herds. Did they know they were leaving home, or did they just wake up one day in what is now Beijing and realize the takeout options were different? Regardless of the intent, the result was a paradigm shift. For the first time, a human species was operating in different climates. They were dealing with the cold of the Caucasus and the humidity of the tropics. They were no longer just an African ape. They were a global entity. But there was a problem. As they pushed further north, the nights got longer and the wind got colder. The naked skin that made them such great runners on the hot savanna became a liability in the chill of a Eurasian winter. They needed something to push back the dark and the cold. They needed a partner. They needed to steal a piece of the sun. Night falls on the savanna, and for the first time in this journey, you are paralyzed by a terror that modern humans have largely forgotten. You aren't afraid of your taxes or your email inbox. You are afraid of being eaten. In the pitch black of the Pleistocene night, you are not the apex predator. You are a slow, fleshy snack that can't see in the dark. The lions can. The hyenas can. The leopards can. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the tall grass is a potential death sentence. You huddle with your group, backs against a cliff face or up in a tree, shivering, waiting for the sun to return and give you back your sight. But then, something changes the equation. A storm rolls in, dry lightning cracking against the horizon. A bolt slams into an acacia tree, and it bursts into flame. The rest of the animals panic. They run. Fire is a force of nature, a destroyer, a chaotic beast that consumes everything it touches. But you don't run. You watch. You see the heat radiating from it. You see the light pushing back the shadows. And then, one of your ancestors does something that is arguably the single most important moment in human history. They don't make fire. They haven't figured that out yet. They steal it. They take a burning branch, a faggot of wood, and they feed it. They nurture it. They realize that this beast can be tamed. Suddenly, the night is no longer the domain of the leopard. You have created a circle of light, a force field that no animal dares to cross. You have extended your day, but the protection is just the side effect. The real revolution happens when you drop a piece of antelope meat into the flames by accident, fish it out and eat it. It tastes better. It's softer. It doesn't take 3 hours to chew. This is the concept of the external stomach. Think about a cow or a gorilla. They spend nearly their entire waking lives chewing. Breaking down raw plant fiber and raw muscle requires massive molars and a huge, complicated gut fermenting away like a brewery. It takes a lot of metabolic energy to run a digestive system that big. But fire does the digestion for you. It breaks down the proteins, gelatinizes the starches, and kills the parasites before the food even touches your lips. This leads to a profound physiological trade-off known as the expensive tissue hypothesis. Evolution is a strict accountant. You have a limited energy budget. You can't have huge biceps, a huge gut, and a huge brain all at once. It costs too many calories. But once you start cooking, your gut doesn't need to be so big anymore. Over thousands of generations, your rib cage narrows, your intestines shrink, and your teeth get smaller. Where does all that saved energy go? It goes upstairs. It fuels the massive expansion of the brain. You literally cooked your way to intelligence. Without fire, there is no philosophy, no math, no moon landing. There is just chewing. But the fire did something else, something deeper. It created the hearth. Before fire, when the sun went down, social life stopped. You slept. After fire, you had 4 or 5 hours of downtime in the safety of the light. You sat around the flames and looked at each other. You bonded. You groomed. And most importantly, you told stories. The campfire was the first school, the first theater, and the first church. It was where the elders passed down the knowledge of which berries kill you and which ones make you see funny colors. It was where the myths of the tribe were spun. The flickering light of the flames might even have played a role in the development of language itself, as we needed more complex ways to describe the invisible world of spirits and memories that seemed to dance in the smoke. Now, historians and archaeologists are still locked in a heated debate about when exactly this happened. It's hard to find evidence of a campfire from 1 million years ago because ash blows away. Some argue it was a late invention, maybe 400,000 years ago. But others point to the Wonderwerk cave in South Africa, where microscopic traces of wood ash and burnt bone suggest that Homo erectus was cooking as far back as 1.5 million years ago. If that's true, then fire isn't just a tool we invented, it's a co-evolutionary partner that shaped our biology from the very beginning. So Homo erectus has the legs to travel and the fire to keep warm. They are unstoppable. They spread across the globe, reaching the far corners of Asia and Europe. And as they settle in these diverse environments, the isolation of the Ice Age begins to work its magic. The glaciers advance and retreat, cutting off populations from one another, leaving them stranded on islands or trapped in mountain valleys. Evolution takes the basic clay of Homo erectus and starts sculpting weird, wonderful, and distinct variations. We are about to visit the strangest of them all. We are going to an island where reality seems to have been shrunk in the wash. We are zooming in now, away from the vast continents and down to a speck of green in the Indonesian archipelago. This is the island of Flores. It is a beautiful, treacherous place, a world of steaming jungles and active volcanoes. And for hundreds of thousands of years, it was cut off from the rest of the world by deep, treacherous ocean trenches that even the lowest sea levels couldn't drain. Here, evolution went off the rails. Islands are strange laboratories. When large animals get trapped on islands with limited resources, they tend to shrink. It's called insular dwarfism. The elephants here, the stegodon, shrank until they were the size of cows. The storks grew to be 6 feet tall, and the rats grew to the size of dogs. But the most shocking inhabitant was a human. Meet Homo floresiensis, affectionately known as the Hobbit. If you met one, you would be looking down, way down. Adults stood only about 3.5 feet tall. Their brains were tiny, roughly the size of a chimp's. And yet, they were undeniably human. They made stone tools. They hunted, and they survived in a nightmare version of a fairy tale. Their main predator wasn't a cat or a wolf. It was a lizard. The Komodo dragon and its larger, extinct cousins ruled this island. Imagine being 3 feet tall and having to fight a 10-foot venomous lizard that treats you like a chicken nugget. That was Tuesday for the hobbits. For a long time, we thought humans were a singular success story. Big brains, tall bodies. But Flores proved that nature isn't afraid to experiment. These tiny humans lived on this island for tens of thousands of years, completely unaware that giant versions of themselves were conquering the rest of the planet. They are a poignant reminder that there is no one right way to be human. Now let's fly north, from the tropical heat of Indonesia to the freezing Altai Mountains in Siberia. We are entering a cave called Denisova. It's a chilly limestone cathedral overlooking a river valley. This cave is unique because it's like a prehistoric motel. Neanderthals stayed here, sapiens stayed here, and wolves stayed here. But there was another guest. For decades, we found bone fragments here that didn't quite fit. Then, in 2010, scientists analyzed the DNA from a single pinky bone of a young girl. The results were a bombshell. It wasn't a Neanderthal. It wasn't a sapiens. It was a ghost, a completely new species of human that we had no idea existed. We called them the Denisovans. We still don't know exactly what they looked like. We have found a few massive teeth, so big that at first, experts thought they belonged to a cave bear. We have found a jawbone on the Tibetan plateau, but their genetic legacy is everywhere. Here is a quirky tidbit. If you are Tibetan, or if you can climb Mount Everest without needing an oxygen tank, you might want to thank a Denisovan. Modern Tibetans possess a specific gene variation, EPAS1, that prevents their blood from thickening at high altitudes. It turns out this isn't a sapiens gene. We didn't evolve it. We stole it. At some point in the misty past, our ancestors mated with Denisovans, and we inherited their high-altitude superpowers. Scientific evidence for the Denisovans is almost entirely molecular. We are building their ghost from the code up. We use proteomics, analyzing ancient proteins in collagen, to identify bones that are too old or degraded for DNA testing. It's forensic science on a 100,000-year-old cold case. The existence of the hobbits and the Denisovans proves that the Ice Age world was a patchwork quilt of humanity. It wasn't a lonely planet. It was a world where you could walk from one valley to another and meet people who were not just culturally different, but biologically distinct. You could look into the eyes of another species and see a reflection of yourself. But while the hobbits were hiding in the jungle and the Denisovans were roaming the high peaks of Asia, another player had claimed the frozen throne of Europe. They are the most famous, the most misunderstood, and the most formidable of our cousins. We are heading west, into the teeth of the glacial wind, to meet the kings of the cold. We are crossing the Ural Mountains now, trudging west into the heart of the Ice Age fortress, Europe. This is not a place for the weak. The winters here are long, dark, and brutal. The summers are short bursts of frantic life, and the rulers of this domain are not us. They are the Neanderthals. Forget the hunched-over grunting caricature you've seen in old cartoons. If you met a Neanderthal in a dark alley, your first impression wouldn't be that they are stupid. It would be that they are terrifyingly strong. Imagine a professional rugby player, but shorter, with thicker bones and muscles that are naturally twice as dense as yours. They are barrel-chested, built like tanks. Their limbs are shorter and stockier, a classic biological adaptation to the cold. This brings us to a hard rule of biology, Bergmann's and Allen's rules. In cold climates, bodies tend to get bulky to hold heat, and limbs tend to get shorter to reduce surface area and heat loss. Think of a polar bear versus a giraffe. The Neanderthal is the polar bear of the human family. They are built to retain calories in a freezing world. Look at their face. It's distinct. A heavy brow ridge that shades their eyes, a chin that recedes, and a nose that is absolutely massive. That nose isn't just for smelling. It's a high-performance HVAC system. It's designed to warm and humidify the freezing, dry air of the tundra before it hits their sensitive lungs. Every breath they take is conditioned by their own anatomy, but their bodies tell a darker story, too. When paleontologists examine Neanderthal skeletons, they find a disturbing pattern. Almost every adult skeleton shows signs of massive, healed trauma. Broken arms, crushed ribs, skull fractures. For years, scientists puzzled over this. Was it war? Was it ritual abuse? Then someone noticed that the pattern of injuries matched exactly one group of modern humans. Rodeo riders. Why? Because rodeo riders interact with large, angry animals at close range. And so did Neanderthals. Neanderthals didn't have bows and arrows. They didn't have spear throwers. Their spears were heavy, thick, and meant for thrusting, not throwing. To eat, a Neanderthal had to creep up on a woolly rhino or a bison, animals the size of cars, and stab it in the flank while it was still alive and very angry. This was combat hunting. It was a contact sport. Every meal was a wrestling match with a monster. This required a level of physical courage and pain tolerance that makes modern extreme sports look like knitting circles. They were the apex predators of Europe for over 300,000 years. They survived glaciations that would have wiped us out. They mastered the art of living in caves, turning them into warm, fire-lit homes lined with furs. They were the kings of the cold, perfectly adapted to their frozen kingdom. But being tough isn't the same as being soulless. For a long time, we dismissed them as brutes, failed humans who were too stupid to survive. But recently, the caves have started whispering a different story. We've found things that shouldn't be there. Things that suggest that behind that heavy brow ridge, there was a mind capable of deep emotion, creativity, and perhaps a spirituality that rivals our own. Step inside the cave. The wind outside is howling, stripping the warmth from anything living. But in here, the air is still and smells of wood smoke, roasted meat, and unwashed bodies. You are sitting across the fire from a Neanderthal. Look at him closely. If you only listened to Victorian scholars or looked at early museum dioramas, you'd expect to see a drooling beast, a creature incapable of thought beyond eat and kill. But look closer. Watch how he moves. He isn't sharpening a spear right now. he is kneeling beside an older man, a much older man. This elder, known to modern science as the Old Man of La Chapelle, is a wreck. He is riddled with arthritis so severe he can barely walk. He has lost almost all his teeth. In the brutal economy of the wild, where every mouth must earn its keep, this man is a liability. By all the laws of natural selection, he should have been left behind in the snow years ago to feed the wolves. But he is here. He is fat, he is warm, and he is loved. The younger Neanderthal takes a piece of cooked meat, chews it in his own mouth until it is soft, and then gently feeds it to the old man. This simple act of pre-mastication is one of the most profound things you will ever witness. It is evidence of compassion. It proves that Neanderthals had a concept of care that extended beyond immediate survival. They valued the wisdom of their elders enough to support them when they could no longer hunt. They had a society built not just on strength, but on bonds of loyalty and affection. This emotional depth gets even deeper and more controversial when we look at how they treated their dead. Travel with me to Shanidar Cave in Iraq. Here in the 1960s, archaeologists found a Neanderthal skeleton buried in a fetal position. But when they analyzed the soil around the body, they found something unexpected. Clumps of pollen. Not just random pollen blowing in from the entrance, but concentrated clusters of specific wildflowers: yarrow, cornflower, bachelor's button, and hollyhock. Some of these plants have medicinal properties. The arrangement suggests that the body was laid to rest on a bed of pine boughs and then covered with armfuls of bright, colorful flowers. It's a flower burial. Now, historians still argue whether this was a deliberate funeral ritual or if a burrowing rodent just happened to stash flower seeds near the body. The Persian Jerd hypothesis. It's a heated debate. But if it was a ritual, it shatters the glass ceiling of humanity. It means they grieved. It means they understood the finality of death and felt the need to mark it with beauty. It means they had souls that hurt, just like yours, and they might have had music, too. In a museum in Slovenia, there is a fragment of a cave bear's femur that is 43,000 years old. It has two clean, circular holes punched into it. This is the Divji Babe flute. If you blow into it, it produces musical notes. Some musicologists argue it can play a diatonic scale. Imagine a Neanderthal sitting by the fire, playing a haunting melody while the blizzard rages outside. It changes everything about how we see them. Of course, the skeptics, and there are many, argue that those holes were just made by a hyena chewing on the bone. They say it's a simulacrum, a natural accident that looks like art. But then we find cave paintings in Spain, simple red ladders and hand stencils that date back 64,000 years, long before Homo Sapiens arrived in Europe. We find circles of broken stalagmites arranged deep in French caves for no apparent survival reason. The evidence is mounting. They were artists. But could they tell you about it? For decades, we assumed they were mute, communicating in grunts and gestures. But genetics has dropped a microphone on that theory. We have sequenced the Neanderthal genome, and we found the FOXP2 gene. This is often called the language gene. It controls the fine motor skills of the mouth and throat required for complex speech. The Neanderthal version of this gene is identical to ours. They had the hardware. They had the hyoid bone in the throat to support a voice box. They had the brain size, and they had the gene. While we can't know if they had subjunctive clauses or poetry, it is overwhelmingly likely that they spoke. They told jokes. They gave orders. They whispered to their children. So as you sit by their fire, realizing that the monster across from you is actually a singing, grieving, storytelling human, you might feel a sense of kinship. You might think that the world is big enough for two kinds of humans, but it isn't. Because while the Neanderthals are singing in their caves in Europe, something is stirring back in Africa. The prototype has been perfected. The Wanderer has returned, upgraded. A new player is about to enter the game, and unlike the Neanderthals, this one isn't content to just survive the cold. This one wants to conquer it. While the Neanderthals are singing to their bone flutes in the frozen caves of Europe, we need to jump back into our time machine and fly south. Way south. We are returning to the cradle. We are going back to Africa, specifically to a site in Morocco called Jebel Irhoud, about 300,000 years ago. Look into a puddle of water here. The face staring back at you finally looks familiar. Gone are the heavy brow ridges that look like a car bumper. Gone is the backward-sloping forehead. Instead, you see a high, vertical forehead. You see a face that is tucked in under the brain case rather than protruding out like a snout. And you see something that no other human species, not the Neanderthals, not erectus, not the hobbits, has ever possessed: a chin. Why do we have chins? Here is your quirky fringe tidbit for the section. Nobody actually knows. Seriously, scientists have debated this for decades. Is it to support the jaw against chewing stresses? Is it for sexual selection, a strong jawline? Or is it just a spandrel, a leftover bit of bone that appeared as our faces shrank? Whatever the reason, if you can fold a towel under your chin, congratulations. You are a member of the most dangerous club on Earth, Homo Sapiens. But the real revolution isn't on the face. It's inside the skull. If you put a sapiens brain on a scale next to a Neanderthal brain, you might be disappointed. Their NAS is often larger. But if you look at the shape, you'll see the difference. The Neanderthal brain is shaped like a football, rugby ball, long and low. Your brain is shaped like a basketball. This is a process called globularization. This round shape reflects a massive reorganization of the internal wiring. The parietal lobes, which handle sensory integration and tool use, and the cerebellum, which handles balance and motor control, are bulging. It's not that we have more RAM than our cousins, it's that we have a better operating system. This new architecture allows us to make connections that other species can't. We can connect the idea of lion with the idea of spirit with the idea of painting. We are the first creatures to think in metaphors. But why did this upgrade happen? It wasn't because Africa was a paradise. It was because Africa was a torture chamber. During this period, the African climate was suffering from mega droughts. Enormous lakes, the size of inland seas, would evaporate into dust bowls in the span of a few generations, only to refill again later. The environment was flickering like a broken light bulb. To survive here, you couldn't be a specialist. If you were evolved only to eat bananas, you died when the jungle dried up. If you were evolved only to hunt hippos, you died when the lake vanished. So, Homo sapiens evolved to be the ultimate generalist. We became the MacGyver of the animal kingdom. We didn't adapt to the environment, we adapted to change itself. This pressure cooker produced a terrifying leap in technology. Remember the Neanderthal method of hunting? Wrestling the rhino? Sapiens looked at that and said, "No thanks." We invented the action-at-a-distance weapon. We developed the atlatl, spear thrower, and eventually the bow and arrow. This seems like a small tweak, throwing a stick harder, but it fundamentally broke the balance of nature. For the first time, a predator could kill a prey animal without the prey animal even knowing it was being hunted. We could kill from 30 yards away, silently, without risking a broken arm or a gouged thigh. It turned hunting from a high-risk gamble into a low-risk harvest. This meant our adults lived longer. It meant our grandmothers survived to teach the grandkids, the grandmother hypothesis. It meant our population could grow in a way that the battered, bruised Neanderthal populations never could. We have the genetic receipts for this origin story too. By analyzing the mitochondrial DNA, which is passed down only from mothers to daughters, of thousands of living humans, geneticists have traced our lineage back to a single theoretical woman. We call her mitochondrial Eve. Now, here is a common, open, scholarly debate you should be aware of. Mitochondrial Eve was not the only woman alive at the time. She wasn't the biblical Eve standing alone in a garden. She was part of a population of thousands. It's just that, over the eons, the unbroken female lineages of all the other women eventually hit a dead end. Sons only, or no children. Eve's lineage is the only one that threaded the needle of history to reach every single person alive today. She likely lived in East Africa around 150,000 to 200,000 years ago. So here we are. We have the chin, we have the globular brain, we have the projectile weapons. We are smart, fast, and dangerous. We are ready to conquer the world. The population is growing. The tribes are expanding, and the horizon is beckoning. But the universe has a sick sense of humor. Just as Homo Sapiens is stretching its legs and getting ready to leave the nursery, the sky turns black, the ground shakes, and humanity is handed a near-extinction event so severe that it will haunt our genome forever. The volcano is waking up. The date is roughly 74,000 years ago. The location is the island of Sumatra, Indonesia. You are not there, and you should be very glad about that. On this day, a supervolcano known as Toba decides to end the world. This isn't a normal eruption. It's not a Mount St. Helens or a Vesuvius. This is a Category 8 eruption on the Volcanic Explosivity Index, the highest possible rating. Toba blasts nearly 3,000 cubic kilometers of rock and ash into the sky. To put that in perspective, that is enough debris to bury the entire United States under a layer of ash 1 foot thick. The sound of the explosion is the loudest noise heard on Earth in the last 2 million years. It is heard 3,000 miles away in India, where people might have thought the sky was tearing open. But the noise isn't the problem. The problem is the sun. The ash column shoots all the way into the stratosphere, spreading out like a dark shroud around the entire planet. It blocks the sunlight. For the next 6 to 10 years, the Earth is plunged into a volcanic winter. Global temperatures plummet by 3 to 5 degrees Celsius instantly. In the higher latitudes, it drops by 15 degrees. The summer rains fail. The monsoons stop. The plants, starved of sunlight, stop growing. The herds of animals, starved of plants, begin to die. And the humans, starved of everything, begin to vanish. This is the Great Filter. Before Toba, early human populations were growing. After Toba, silence. Genetic studies suggest that the human population crashed spectacularly. We were reduced to a bottleneck of perhaps 3,000 to 10,000 breeding pairs. Think about that. The entire future of our species, every billionaire, every beggar, every soldier, every artist, everyone you have ever known or read about, was contained in a group of people small enough to fit into a modest sports arena. If a viral plague had swept through that group, or if the drought had lasted another decade, or if a few key hunting parties had failed to return, that would have been it. The experiment of humanity would have ended right there. The Earth would belong to the jellyfish and the cockroaches. This bottleneck explains a quirky scientific fact. Humans are incredibly inbred. I know, it's not polite to say, but it's true. A single troop of 50 chimpanzees in West Africa has more genetic diversity than all 8 billion humans alive today combined. We are all essentially cousins, descendants of that tiny, ragged band of survivors who clung to life while the sky was black. This is the founder effect. We lost the vast majority of our genetic variation because the people carrying it died. We are the lucky few who made it through the eye of the needle. Now, I have to be fair to the academic boxing match going on right now. There is a fierce, open, scholarly debate about the severity of the Toba catastrophe. Some researchers looking at sediment cores in Lake Malawi in Africa argue that the impact there wasn't actually that bad, maybe just a few rough years, not a total apocalypse. They point to stone tools found in India, above and below the Toba ash layer, that look identical, suggesting that people there survived the blast just fine. They call it the Toba fizzle theory, but others argue that even if the climate impact was patchy, the ecological collapse was real. And regardless of the volcano's specific role, the genetic data is undeniable. Something almost wiped us out around this time. Imagine the psychological toll of this era. You are living in a world where the sun is a pale, sickly disk that provides no warmth. The familiar stars are hidden behind a veil of dust. The animals you hunt are gaunt skeletons. You don't know that a volcano in Indonesia caused this. You just know that the gods are angry. You just know that the world has turned against you. This trauma likely forced us to tighten our social networks even further. If you wanted to survive, you couldn't just rely on your immediate family. You had to have friends in the next valley. You had to trade. You had to share. It was during this dark age that us versus them might have expanded to include a much larger definition of us. Eventually, the dust settled. The sun returned. The plants grew back. But the humans who emerged from the Toba catastrophe were different. They were hardened. They were fewer in number, but they were sharper, more desperate, and more mobile. And just as the skies cleared, the earth offered them an apology. It offered them a road. The climate cycle shifted again, and the great barrier of the Sahara Desert, the sandy wall that had trapped us in Africa for so long, suddenly turned green. The skies have cleared, the volcanic winter of Toba has faded, and you are standing on the edge of the greatest barrier in human history, the Sahara Desert. Today, this is a sea of sand the size of the United States, a killing field for anyone foolish enough to cross it without a convoy. But you are looking at something very different. You are looking at a garden. The climate pendulum has swung again. The Earth's wobble has pulled the African monsoon belt northward. The green Sahara is open for business. Instead of dunes, you see a network of megalakes. Lake Mega-Chad is bigger than the Caspian Sea. There are rivers thundering through what are now dry wadis in Libya. There are hippos wallowing in Egypt. There are gazelles grazing where today there is only scorching rock. This phenomenon acts as a massive planetary engine known as the Sahara Pump. When the desert turns green, it sucks humanity in from the south, inviting tribes to expand into this new, lush paradise. But the good times don't last. When the wobble shifts back and the desert returns, the pump reverses. It squeezes the populations, pushing them out toward the edges, north into the Mediterranean and east into the Levant. You are part of this flow. You are following the game, moving north, step by step, generation by generation. You aren't migrating in the sense that you have a destination in mind. You are just looking for the next waterhole, and eventually that search leads you out of Africa and into the Middle East. But here is the plot twist that most history books gloss over. This wasn't the first time we tried to leave. Archaeologists have found the graves of early Homo Sapiens in the caves of Skull and Kafze in modern-day Israel. These skeletons are old, dating back 100,000 to 120,000 years. These were the pioneers of the first wave. They made it out of Africa. They were tall, they had modern chins, and they looked like us. But they failed. They encountered the Neanderthals, who were already living in the Levant, and apparently the Neanderthals won. Or perhaps the climate turned cold again, favoring the stocky, cold-adapted Neanderthals over the lanky African immigrants. Historians still argue whether this was a military defeat, an ecological failure, or if these early pioneers simply lacked the social technology to survive. Whatever the reason, this first wave of humanity vanished. Their lineage died out. The Neanderthals reclaimed the caves, burying their own dead on top of ours. It was a false start. So, for thousands of years, the door to the rest of the world remained shut. We were trapped in Africa, contained by the Neanderthal barrier. Then, about 60,000 years ago, the pump fired again. A new wave of sapiens pushed north. But this group was different. They weren't just anatomically modern. They were behaviorally modern. They carried something with them that the first wave lacked, a sort of cultural glue that allowed them to operate in larger, more cohesive groups. We see evidence of this in a surprisingly beautiful form. Ostrich eggshell beads. This is a quirky tidbit that reveals a hidden superpower. Archaeologists have found identical beads made from ostrich eggshells, drilled and shaped in the exact same style, spread across thousands of miles of Africa, following these migration routes. This suggests the existence of the world's first social network. These beads weren't just jewelry, they were likely gifts, tokens of exchange that connected distant tribes. They imply that if you met a stranger on the road, you could show your beads and establish a connection. I know a guy who knows a guy who makes beads like this. This Internet of the Stone Age meant that when hard times hit, you had allies. You had a safety net. You could move into a neighbor's territory because you were part of the same bead trading culture. This second wave didn't stop in Israel. They pushed through. They had better weapons, better coordination, and perhaps a new way of thinking. This is the migration that stuck. This is the wave that populated the entire planet. Every non-African person alive today, from the Inuit in the Arctic, to the Aborigines in Australia, to the cashier at your local grocery store, is a descendant of this specific group of wanderers who crossed the Green Sahara about 60,000 years ago. But what gave them the edge? Why did the second wave succeed where the first one failed? It wasn't just sharper spears or better beads. It was a change in the software. Something happened in the human brain, a spark, a mutation, a rewire that turned us from smart apes into storytellers. We are about to walk into the era of the cognitive revolution, the moment when we started believing in things that don't exist. Something clicked. For millions of years, human evolution was a story of hardware. We got taller. We got hairless. Our brains got bigger. But if you looked at a human from 100,000 years ago, even though they looked exactly like us physically, their tools and their behavior were pretty much stuck in a loop. They made the same spear points for thousands of years. They didn't trade much. They didn't paint. It was as if they had a supercomputer sitting on their shoulders, but it was running MS-DOS. Then, roughly 70,000 to 50,000 years ago, the operating system got an update. This is the cognitive revolution. It is the moment when Homo sapiens stopped being just another smart ape and became the ruler of the planet. And the secret weapon wasn't a sharper spear or a stronger muscle. It was a lie. Well, not a lie exactly. It was fiction. Consider this. A green monkey can scream to its troop, "Careful, a lion is near the river." That is a factual statement about physical reality. It conveys immediate life-saving information. A Neanderthal could almost certainly say something similar. But somewhere in this window of time, a sapiens acquired the ability to say, "The lion is the guardian spirit of our tribe." That sentence is nonsense. It describes something that does not exist in the physical world. There is no spirit. But by believing in that fiction, 1,000 strangers who have never met can cooperate. They can fight together, trade together, and build together, simply because they all believe in the same lion spirit. This ability to discuss things that don't exist, gods, nations, human rights, limited liability corporations, money, is the unique superpower of our species. You can't convince a chimpanzee to give you a banana by promising him unlimited bananas in monkey heaven. He won't buy it. But humans? We buy it every day. This creates flexible cooperation. Ants cooperate in huge numbers, but they are rigid. They can't change the rules. Wolves cooperate flexibly, but only in small numbers. Sapiens can cooperate in massive numbers and change the rules overnight by changing the story. We see this shift not just in our social lives, but in our hands. The tools suddenly get complicated, ridiculously complicated. Take the sewing needle. I know it sounds boring compared to a spear, but think about the engineering required to make one. You can't just chip a rock to make a needle. You have to take a sliver of bone. You have to grind it smooth. And then, the hardest part, you have to drill a tiny, perfect eye into the end of it without shattering the bone. This requires a specialized drill tool. It requires steady hands. But most of all, it requires multi-stage planning. You have to imagine the needle, then imagine the tool to make the needle, then find the material for the tool, then make the tool, then make the needle, then find the sinew, then sew the clothes. This is a cognitive leap. It's the ability to hold a complex, multi-step future in your mind and work backward to the present. It represents a level of focus and working memory that our ancestors simply didn't show. The scientific evidence for this revolution is the sudden explosion of non-utilitarian objects in the archaeological record. Before this period, almost everything we find is practical. A scraper, a knife, a point. After this period, we find things that are useless. We find beads. We find ochre kits for body painting. We find statues of women with exaggerated features. We find the Lion Man of Hohenstein-Stadel, a figurine carved from mammoth ivory that depicts a human body with a lion's head. Think about the Lion Man. It depicts a creature that does not exist. The artist had to combine two different categories in their mind, man and lion, to create a third imaginary category. This is the birth of art, but more importantly, it is the birth of the virtual world. Now, historians and neurologists are locked in a fascinating open scholarly debate about how this happened. Did it happen overnight? Some argue for a macro-mutation, a single accidental genetic rewire in the brain, perhaps related to that FOXP2 language gene or the shape of the brain, that suddenly turned on the lights. This is the Big Bang theory of consciousness. Others argue that it was a slow, gradual accumulation of cultural tricks. They say there was no genetic spark. We just got better at teaching each other, accumulating software patches over thousands of years until we reached a tipping point. Whichever it was, the result was a species that was no longer bound by the slow pace of genetic evolution. If a wolf wants to survive in the Arctic, it has to wait 100,000 years to evolve a thicker coat. If a sapiens wants to survive in the Arctic, they just invent a sewing needle and stitch a coat from the wolf's fur. We decoupled our survival from our biology. And armed with this new software, this ability to plan, to invent, and to organize in massive groups bound by myth, we walked out of the shadows. We looked north, toward the icy domains of our cousins, and we didn't just see a cold wasteland. We saw a conquest. The Neanderthals in Europe had no idea what was coming. They were strong. They were adapted. But they were about to meet a creature that could rewrite reality itself. You are crouching in a thicket of dwarf willow, high in the mountains of what will one day be Bulgaria. The year is roughly 45,000 BC. The wind here bites exposed skin like a piranha, but you ignore it. Your attention is fixed on the valley floor below. You smell it before you see it. It's a scent distinct from the clean, cold air of the glacier, the smell of burning bone and unwashed bodies. You signal to your hunting party, a group of about 30 lean, shivering sapiens, and you inch forward. Then you see them. They are gathered around a kill. At first glance, they look like you. But as you watch them butcher the carcass of a bison, you realize they are wrong. They are too thick. Their necks are non-existent, their shoulders are immense, and they move with a heavy, explosive power that makes your own agile muscles feel like twigs. This is first contact. It is a moment that has been replayed in 1,000 sci-fi movies, aliens landing on the White House lawn, but it actually happened. Two intelligent, technological, linguistic species meeting face to face on the frozen frontier of Europe. Imagine the confusion. Imagine the fear. You are staring at a creature that looks like a funhouse mirror reflection of yourself. They are the trolls of your future mythology. They are the wild men of the woods. If this were a physical fight, one-on-one in a cage match, the Neanderthal wins 10 times out of 10. They could snap your arm like a dry branch. But you aren't fighting one-on-one. You have two advantages that they can't counter. First, you have range. You are clutching a spear thrower, an atlatl. You can kill them from 50 yards away. They have to run at you to fight. By the time they close the distance, your group can turn them into pin cushions. Second, and more importantly, you have friends. Lots of friends. Anthropologists talk about Dunbar's number, the cognitive limit to the number of people with whom one can maintain stable social relationships. For humans, it's about 150. For Neanderthals, based on the size of their living sites, it was likely much smaller, perhaps 20 or 30. When a Neanderthal band fights, they bring a squad. When you fight, you bring a battalion. You can swarm them. You can absorb losses that would wipe them out. But we now know that this wasn't a simple blitzkrieg, where we showed up and immediately wiped them off the map. It was a slow, messy, and fluctuating border war. We have spectacular scientific evidence for this tug-of-war at the Mandarin Cave in France. For years, archaeologists assumed that once sapiens arrived in a region, the Neanderthals vanished. But at Mandarin, the soil layers tell a different story. We find a layer of Neanderthal tools. Then, suddenly, a layer of sapiens tools. distinctly modern points. Then, incredibly, a layer of Neanderthal tools again on top of that. And finally, sapiens tools on top. This means that for a period of maybe 40 years, a single human lifetime, sapiens moved into this cave, lived there, and then either left or were pushed out, and the Neanderthals moved back in. It was a timeshare. The frontier of the Ice Age wasn't a moving line. It was a checkerboard. We traded territory. We tracked each other. We likely watched each other's fires from across the valley, wondering who the hell those people were. And we were watching closely. Here is a quirky tidbit that suggests a strange kind of envy. For hundreds of thousands of years, Neanderthals didn't really do bling. No jewelry, no fancy bone tools. Then, right around the time sapiens show up with our necklaces and ivory beads, suddenly we start finding Neanderthal sites filled with necklaces and ivory beads. This is called the Châtelperronian industry. Some experts argue it's just independent invention, but others see the first case of industrial espionage. Did they see our ornaments and think, hey, that looks cool? Did they trade for them? Or did they find them on the bodies of the sapiens they killed and try to copy them? It paints a picture of a species that was intelligent enough to learn, but perhaps just a step behind the wave of innovation coming from Africa. The tension in that valley is palpable. You, the scout, grip your weapon. The Neanderthals below finish their butchery. By all logic, this should end in bloodshed. The history of our species suggests that we don't play well with others. But then, something unexpected happens. The arrow is not fired. The spear is lowered. Curiosity overrides fear. A look is exchanged. And instead of war, we get something far more complicated. We get intimacy. Because, as it turns out, we didn't just want to kill them. In the cold, lonely nights of the Pleistocene, sometimes you don't care if the person next to you has a heavy brow ridge. Sometimes you just want to be warm. It wasn't just war. It was something much more complicated, much more human, and arguably much more shocking. For decades, archaeologists assumed that if sapiens and Neanderthals ever met, the result was a bloodbath. We projected our own history of colonization and genocide onto the past. We assumed we came, we saw, we conquered, and they died. But in 2010, the geneticists walked into the room and dropped a bomb that shattered that narrative forever. They sequenced the Neanderthal genome, compared it to modern humans, and found a match. If you are listening to this and your ancestors came from Europe, Asia, or really anywhere outside of sub-Saharan Africa, you are part alien. You are walking around right now with between 1% and 4% Neanderthal DNA in every cell of your body. This changes the scene in that valley completely. It means that the scout on the ridge didn't just throw a spear. At some point, the curiosity we spoke about turned into contact. Eyes met, food was shared, and children were born. These children were hybrids, living bridges between two evolutionary lineages that had been separated for 500,000 years. This is a profound realization. We didn't just replace the Neanderthals, we absorbed them. We mated with them. And this wasn't a one-time fling. It happened enough times, over enough thousands of years, to leave a permanent stamp on the human species. But this isn't just a fun fact for your next dinner party. It is a medical reality that affects you today. This brings us to the scientific evidence of introgression. When we mated with the Neanderthals, we weren't just swapping genes for fun. We were downloading a survival update. Neanderthals had been living in Eurasia for hundreds of thousands of years. Their immune systems were already adapted to the local bacteria, viruses, and parasites of the north. We, the fresh arrivals from Africa, were immunologically naked. By breeding with them, we stole their immune system. We inherited a set of genes, specifically in the HLA complex, that helped us fight off ancient flu and Epstein-Barr viruses. We survived the Ice Age partly because we hacked the local biology. But there was a trade-off. Evolution is a messy coder. Along with the good stuff, we inherited some buggy software. Here is a quirky tidbit about your own health. If you suffer from depression, have a nicotine addiction, or are prone to excessive blood clotting, you might be able to blame your great-great-great-great-grandfather, the Neanderthal. The blood clotting gene was actually a superpower back then. It helped wounds heal faster, which is great when you hunt rhinos with a pointy stick. But today, when you sit at a desk for 8 hours, that same gene increases your risk of strokes and embolisms. We are operating modern bodies with prehistoric hybrid software. The mixing wasn't limited to just us and Neanderthals either. The Ice Age was a true melting pot. In that same cave in Siberia, Denisova Cave, scientists found a single bone fragment from a teenage girl who lived 90,000 years ago. Her name is Denny, technically Denisova 11. When they ran her DNA, they couldn't believe the results. Her mother was a Neanderthal. Her father was a Denisovan. Denny was a first-generation hybrid. She is concrete proof that these different human species weren't just passing ships in the night. They were interacting, mating, and raising families together. It paints a picture of a Middle-earth reality where different races of humans mingled on the frontiers. However, we have to address the dark side of this story. Historians and anthropologists are locked in an uncomfortable open scholarly debate about the nature of these unions. Was this Romeo and Juliet, or was it something far more brutal? Human history is rife with the abduction of women during warfare. It is entirely possible, perhaps even likely, that many of these interbreeding events were not consensual. They may have been the result of raids, capture, and slavery. We see the genetic signal, but we don't see the context. We don't know if those hybrid children were loved and raised by two cultures, or if they were outcasts, struggling to find a place in a world that saw them as half-breeds. Yet the fact remains, they survived. They had children of their own, and those children had children in an unbroken chain that leads directly to you. So, in a strange, haunting way, the Neanderthals never really went extinct. They are still here. They are looking out of your eyes. When you feel the cold bite your skin and you shiver, that is a sapiens reaction. But when your blood clots to stop a bleed, or your immune system rallies against a strange flu, that might be the ghost of a Neanderthal protecting you from beyond the grave. But while we absorbed some of them, we didn't absorb them all. The populations were too different, and the competition was too fierce. As the millennia ground on, the pure-blooded Neanderthals began to fade. The hybrids assimilated into the sapiens tide, but the distinct ancient lineage of the Neanderthal was pushed to the fringes. We are about to witness the end of an era. We are going to travel to the last fortress of the Neanderthals, to the very edge of the continent, to watch the last fire go out. We are traveling to the end of the line. We are standing on the very edge of the European continent, on the limestone cliffs of Gibraltar, looking out over the strait toward Africa. The year is roughly 28,000 to 24,000 years ago. Below you, cut into the cliff face just above the crashing waves, is a place called Gorham's Cave. This is the Alamo of the Neanderthals. This is where the last known campfire of their species burned. By this point, they have disappeared from the rest of Europe. The great clans of the German forests, the Russian steppes, and the French river valleys are gone. They have been pushed further and further south, retreating away from the encroaching ice and the encroaching sapiens until they hit the sea. There is nowhere left to run. Inside the cave, the mood is quiet. The group is small, maybe a dozen individuals. They are still making their tools. They are still eating roasted ibex. They are still human. But they are the last of their kind. When the last member of this group dies, a lineage that has walked the earth for 400,000 years will simply stop. How did it come to this? Why did the kings of the cold lose their crown? It's tempting to imagine a War of the Worlds scenario, a great final battle where sapiens slaughtered them on the field of honor. But the reality was likely much slower, much quieter, and much crueler. It wasn't genocide, it was economics. This brings us to the competitive exclusion principle. This is a biological rule that states two species competing for the exact same resource in the exact same niche cannot coexist indefinitely. One will always be slightly more efficient than the other. Think about the math. Suppose Homo sapiens, with our lighter bodies, projectile weapons, and broader trading networks, were just 2% more efficient at extracting calories from the environment. Just 2%. That means our babies survived slightly more often. Our mothers recovered from childbirth slightly faster. Over a single winter, you wouldn't notice the difference. But compound that 2% advantage over 1,000 years? It's a mathematical landslide. The Neanderthals weren't necessarily killed. They were out-eaten. They were slowly starved out of existence, one valley at a time. Every time they went to a favorite hunting ground, they found the game was already spooked or the berries were already picked. Every time they tried to move, they bumped into a sapiens tribe that was slightly larger and slightly better fed. There is also a quirky tidbit of bad timing known as the climate whiplash. The Neanderthals had survived brutal cold before, but right when sapiens arrived in Europe, the climate became incredibly unstable, flickering rapidly between cold and warm, Danskad Öshker events. The forests turned to steppe, then back to forest, then back to steppe. Neanderthals were ambush hunters who relied on forest cover to get close to their prey. Sapiens were open field runners with ranged weapons. When the forests vanished, the Neanderthals lost their tactical advantage. They were like guerrillas stripped of their jungle, forced to fight a standing army on an open plain. They were experts in a world that was disappearing. And then there is the invisible killer: disease. Just as we brought smallpox to the Americas, we likely brought tropical African pathogens to Europe. Diseases like tapeworms, tuberculosis, and Helicobacter pylori. The Neanderthals, having lived in the antiseptic cold for eons, had no resistance. It is possible that the conquest of Europe was actually won by a bacterium, leaving empty caves for us to move into. So, the fire in Gorham's cave flickers and dies. The last Neanderthal takes a final breath, and the sound of the ocean swallows the silence. This is a profound moment in the history of our planet. For millions of years, the Earth was home to a variety of human types. There was a diversity of minds, a diversity of souls. Now there is only one. The silence is deafening. We are the survivors, yes, but we are also the lonely ones. We are the last branch on the tree. There is no one left to talk to who isn't us. But while the other humans are gone, the world is not empty. In fact, as we look around this frozen landscape, we realize that we are surrounded by creatures that make the Neanderthals look like playground playmates. We have conquered the other humans, but we have not yet conquered the beasts. The Ice Age is the era of Megafauna. It is a world of giants. And if we want to survive the next chapter, we are going to have to do more than just outsmart a Neanderthal. We are going to have to kill a god. You might feel a sense of existential dread standing at the mouth of that empty cave in Gibraltar, realizing that Homo Sapiens is now the only game in town. It's a lonely feeling. But as you turn your back on the ocean and look north toward the heart of the continent, you realize something else. You might be the only human, but you are definitely not alone. In fact, you are terrifyingly outnumbered. We are entering the era of the Megafauna. If the Ice Age was a horror movie for humans, it was a superhero movie for animals. Everything is bigger, faster, and hairier. It's as if the cold climate acted like a biological steroid, pumping up the volume on life itself. You are stepping on to the Mammoth Steppe. Now, when you picture the Ice Age, you probably imagine a barren, snow-covered wasteland where a single starving wolf howls at the moon. Erase that image. The Mammoth Steppe was the largest continuous biome on Earth, stretching from Spain, across Russia, over the Bering Bridge, and all the way to Canada. And it wasn't a wasteland. It was the Serengeti of the North. It was a cold, dry grassland that exploded with life. Because the air was so dry, the snow didn't pile up in deep drifts. This meant the grass, nutrient-rich, high-protein grass, was accessible all year round. It was an endless salad bar that extended for thousands of miles. And this salad bar supported a biomass of animals that rivals the modern African savanna. But there is a twist. In Africa, you have zebras and gazelles. Here, you have their nightmares. Everything here suffers from a condition we might call terrestrial gigantism. Why get big? Part of it is our old friend Bergman's rule again. Big bodies hold heat better. A massive bulk has a low surface area to volume ratio, meaning the cold can't get to your core as easily. It's the same reason a cup of coffee cools down faster than a bathtub of water. To survive the Ice Age, it paid to be a bathtub. But there is another reason. Defense. When the predators are the size of grizzly bears, being a small deer is a bad career move. The only way to survive is to become a tank. The undisputed king of this landscape is, of course, the woolly mammoth. You've seen the drawings, but standing next to one is a spiritual experience. A full-grown male stands 11 feet tall at the shoulder and weighs 6 tons. His tusks are spiraled lances of ivory that can reach 10 feet in length. He is a mountain of fur, fat, and muscle. And here is the scientific evidence that blows the scale of this world wide open. For years we found mammoth bones and assumed they just kind of hung around in one valley, munching grass. But recently, scientists at the University of Alaska Fairbanks analyzed the chemical isotopes in the tusk of a single male mammoth who lived 17,000 years ago. Let's call him Kick. As a mammoth grows, its tusk adds layers like tree rings. The isotopes in the food and water it consumes get locked into those layers, creating a GPS log of where the animal has been. By reading Kick's tusk, they reconstructed his life's journey. In his 28 years of life, this single animal walked nearly 50,000 miles. That is enough to circle the Earth twice. It is almost the distance to the moon and back. These weren't stationary cows. They were intercontinental travelers, marching back and forth across the world in a ceaseless rhythm of migration. This leads to a fascinating open scholarly debate known as the productivity paradox. Paleobiologists still argue how a frozen environment with a short, growing season could support such massive herds of multi-ton animals. Some argue the mammoths themselves were the secret. This brings us to our quirky tidbit. The mammoth as a geoengineer. Mammoths didn't just live in the ecosystem, they built it. Their massive feet trampled the snow, packing it down so the frost could penetrate deep into the ground, preserving the permafrost. They knocked down trees and shrubs, preventing the forest from taking over the grassland. And frankly, they pooped. A lot. They were giant, mobile fertilizer spreaders, recycling nutrients at an industrial scale. The theory goes that when the mammoths died, the ecosystem collapsed because the gardeners were gone. The moss and shrubs took over, the grass died, and the steppe vanished. It suggests a fragile loop. The cold created the mammoths, but the mammoths maintained the steppe. As you walk through this landscape, you feel like a mouse in a room full of elephants. You are small, you are soft, you have no claws, no fangs, and no fur. To the creatures of the steppe, you look like a hairless, upright snack. And it's not just the mammoths. The steppe is teeming with other titans. There are herds of horses, millions strong. There are bison that make modern American bison look like calves. There are elk with antlers spanning 12 feet. The Megaloceros, so wide they couldn't walk through a modern forest without getting stuck. This is the world your ancestors stepped into. It was a world of unimaginable plenty, where a single kill could feed a tribe for weeks. But it was also a world where you were constantly being watched. Because where there are millions of pounds of meat walking around, there are things evolved to eat that meat. And unlike the lions of Africa, who generally know that humans are dangerous and best avoided, the predators of the Ice Age have never seen you before. To them, you are just a new, slow, funny-smelling animal that has wandered onto the menu. We are about to meet the butchers of the north, and trust me, you're going to want to stay close to the fire. As you pick your way through the tussocks of dry grass, keeping a respectful distance from the herd of mammoths thundering in the distance, you hear a sound that freezes your blood. It's a low, resonant huffing, like a steam engine idling. You turn slowly. Emerging from the morning mist is a creature that looks like it was designed by a committee of tanks. This is the woolly rhinoceros, or Coelodonta antiquitatis. If the mammoth is the king of the steppe, the rhino is its heavy infantry. It stands about shoulder height to a modern man, but it is immensely broad, a solid brick of muscle wrapped in a thick, shaggy coat. But your eyes are drawn immediately to the face. It carries 2 horns made of keratin, just like your fingernails. The front horn is enormous, over 3 feet long, and unlike the curved daggers of modern African rhinos, this one is flattened from side to side, shaped like a blade or a shovel. This brings us to a fascinating open scholarly debate among paleontologists. The snowplow hypothesis. Why have a flat horn? Some experts argue that this wasn't primarily a weapon for fighting off lions or rival males. They believe it was a tool. In the deep winter, when the grass is buried under a hard crust of ice and snow, the rhino would use its massive neck muscles to sweep this flat horn back and forth, clearing a path to the food below. It's a biological snow shovel. It suggests that this animal wasn't just surviving the cold, it was engineered to dismantle it. And thanks to the freezer-like conditions of the permafrost, we know exactly what they looked like in high definition. Here is a quirky tidbit that adds a splash of color to this black and white world. In 2014, hunters in Siberia found the mummified remains of a baby woolly rhino. They named her Sasha. Sasha was so well preserved that we could see her fur. It wasn't just dull gray or brown, it was a strawberry blonde. Imagine a 2-ton tank with the hair color of a Weasley. It's a reminder that these weren't movie monsters. They were real animals with variation and distinct features. But the rhino stops grazing. Its ears swivel. It smells something you missed. In a panic, It wheels around and bolts, its massive hooves churning the permafrost. You look back at the tall grass, and now you see why. You are being hunted by the cave lion, Panthera spelaea. The name sounds academic, but the reality is a nightmare. This cat is about 10% to 20% larger than a modern African lion. It stands nearly 4 feet tall at the shoulder. But the most striking thing is what it doesn't have. Based on ancient cave paintings found in Chauvet and Lascaux, the males of this species had no mane. Without that shaggy collar to break up their outline, they look sleeker, more muscular, and infinitely more focused. They look like giant 800-pound lionesses. This cat doesn't roar to announce its presence. It is a silent ghost on the steppe. It specializes in taking down reindeer and young bison, but it is ambitious enough to drag down a subadult mammoth if the opportunity arises. And you? You are slow. You are weak. You are barely a mouthful. So how do you survive in a world where the herbivores are tanks and the carnivores are giants? You have no claws. You have no thick fur. And perhaps most critically, you have no wood. Look around. We are on the steppe. There are no trees. No trees mean no timber for houses. No timber means no shelter from the wind that can freeze your skin in minutes. A modern survivalist would die here. But your ancestors were geniuses of adaptation. If the landscape doesn't give you wood, you build with what the landscape does provide. You build with the dead. Travel with me to the village of Mezhirich in what is now Ukraine. Here, archaeologists have uncovered one of the most metal architectural achievements in human history. It is a village of huts, but they aren't made of mud or stone. They are made entirely of mammoth bones. This is a mainstream historical fact that sounds like fantasy. To build just one of these huts, the builders used the bones of nearly 150 mammoths. They took the massive jaw bones and stacked them in a circle to form the foundation, interlocking them in a herringbone pattern that is both structurally sound and aesthetically striking. They used the long, curved tusks to form the arches of the roof, draping skins over them to create a dome. Imagine walking into one of these homes. The walls are made of skulls. The roof is made of ivory. Inside, a fire burns in a central hearth, fueled not by wood, but by crushed bone, which burns hot and clean. The floor is lined with furs. It is warm. It is safe. Living inside the ribcage of your prey is the ultimate power move. It sends a message to the world: I am small, but I am the master of this domain. These mammoth houses required immense effort to build. They suggest that humans weren't just wandering aimlessly. They were settling down. They were gathering the bones, either from their own kills or by scavenging natural graveyards, and creating permanent structures. They had home addresses on the steppe. We have scientific evidence that these weren't just temporary shelters. We find pit houses dug into the permafrost to store meat, primitive freezers. We find heaps of amber ornaments and drilled shells inside the huts. This was a culture. These people sat on furniture made of mammoth vertebrae, carving figurines of birds and women, safe inside a fortress made of giants. This ability to turn the environment, no matter how hostile, into a tool is the defining trait of Homo sapiens. The rhino uses its horn to clear the snow. The lion uses its muscle to kill the prey. But the human uses the rhino and the lion and the mammoth to build a world. We don't just inhabit the ecosystem, we dismantle it and reassemble it to fit our needs. But the steppe of Eurasia is just one theater of this war. While our ancestors in Ukraine are stacking mammoth skulls, another group of humans has pushed even further. They have crossed the Bering land bridge and are trickling down into a new world. And if they thought the woolly rhino was strange, they are about to have their minds blown. We are leaving the old world behind. We are crossing the ice to the Americas. And down in the south, isolated for millions of years, evolution has been brewing a batch of monsters that defy all logic. We are leaving the mammoth steppe behind. We are walking south, down the spine of the Americas, until the air grows humid and the endless grass gives way to dense, tangled vegetation. You are standing on the Isthmus of Panama, a narrow strip of land that rose from the sea roughly 3 million years ago. This isn't just a land bridge. It is a biological airlock. For tens of millions of years, South America was an island continent. It was completely cut off from the rest of the world, drifting in splendid isolation, just like Australia does today. In that solitude, evolution went a little mad. Without lions, wolves, or horses to compete with, the local animals evolved into forms that looked like they were drawn by a child with a fever. But when the isthmus closed, the airlock opened. The great American biotic interchange began. It was a slow-motion collision of two worlds. The cats, bears, and camels from the north poured south. The opossums and armadillos from the south poured north. You are stepping into this battlefield of biology, but the creatures you are about to meet are unlike anything you have seen in the frozen north. Push through the ferns and step into a clearing. At first you think you are looking at a boulder, but then the boulder moves. It's a glyptodon. Imagine an armadillo. Now inflate it until it is the size and weight of a Volkswagen Beetle. This is a walking tank. It is covered in a carapace made of thousands of bony plates fused together, creating a dome so strong that a jaguar could jump on it and break its paws. The head is capped with a bony helmet. The tail is an armored tube. Some related species, like Doedicurus, took this defense a step further and evolved a tail ending in a spiked club, like a medieval mace. This wasn't just for show. Paleontologists have found glyptodon shells with fractures that perfectly match the shape of another glyptodon's tail club. They weren't just fighting predators, they were fighting each other, bashing their shells like bumper cars in slow motion. A quirky tidbit regarding these shells. Early human hunters didn't just see a meal, they saw real estate. We have found archaeological sites where ancient South Americans apparently used empty glyptodon shells as ready-made shelters. Imagine camping out for the night inside the ribcage of a giant armadillo, huddled safe from the rain under a roof made of bone. It's the ultimate upcycling. But the weirdness doesn't stop with the tank rats. Look over there, near the water. You see a herd of animals that look like... well, it's hard to say. They have the body of a camel, the feet of a rhinoceros, and the face of a depressed tapir. This is Macrauchenia. Darwin himself found the first fossils of this creature and called it the strangest animal ever discovered. For over a century, scientists couldn't figure out where to put it on the tree of life. It has a long neck and a small trunk, a proboscis dangling over its mouth. It belongs to a group of animals called litopterns that went completely extinct. They are the evolutionary equivalent of a dead-end street. They look like camels, but they aren't related to camels at all. They are just a ghost shape that nature tried once and then discarded. But you haven't seen the king yet. The ground shakes. It's a rhythmic, heavy thudding that vibrates up through the soles of your feet. You look up, and you keep looking up. Emerging from the trees is the Megatherium. the giant ground sloth. Forget the cute, sleepy sloths you know today that hang from branches and move at the speed of a growing fingernail. This thing is a monster. It stands 20 feet tall on its hind legs. It weighs 4 tons, as much as a bull elephant. It is so massive that it can't climb trees. Instead, it just knocks them over. If you were hiding in a second-story bedroom, this animal could look through the window and lick your face. Getty Images. It sits back on its massive haunches, using its thick tail like a tripod for balance, and reaches up with claws the size of butcher knives to strip entire branches bare. These claws are terrifying, curved, sharp, and 12 inches long. But strangely, it walks on the sides of its feet, its knuckles turned under to keep those claws sharp. It looks clumsy, waddling along like a giant, shaggy bear. But with that size, it doesn't need to be graceful. It just needs to be indestructible. We have a stunning piece of scientific evidence that proves just how much these giants altered the landscape. In Brazil, geologists kept finding massive, smooth tunnels dug into the hillsides. For years, they thought these were paleo burrows formed by ancient lava flows or water erosion. But the tunnels were too symmetrical. And then, they looked at the walls. They found claw marks. These aren't caves. They are burrows. Massive underground highways dug by giant ground sloths. You can walk through them today standing upright. Some are hundreds of feet long. Imagine the sheer power required to dig a tunnel through solid earth that is big enough for a Volkswagen to drive through. It suggests that these sloths weren't just solitary browsers. They were engineers who created their own subterranean cities to escape the heat or the predators. But were they just peaceful vegetarians? This is where the open scholarly debate gets dark. While Megatherium had the teeth of a herbivore, recent chemical analysis of their hair suggests they might have been facultative carnivores. If a Megatherium stumbled across a carcass or a slow-moving animal, it might have eaten it. Imagine a 4-ton sloth deciding it wants steak for dinner. It turns a goofy giant into a nightmare. This isolated world of South America was a fortress of giants. The Glyptodon was the shield, and the Megatherium was the wall. They had evolved in a world without clever tool-using primates. They had no concept of a spear. When humans arrived, peering through the jungle foliage at these slow, massive beasts, they must have thought they had stumbled into a larder stocked by the gods. But the larder wasn't unguarded, because where there are 4-ton sloths, there are things evolved to kill 4-ton sloths. You might think you are safe because the big cats stayed in the north. You are wrong. The predators here don't have fur. They have feathers. And they are hungry. You are standing in the pampas of what will one day be Argentina. It is a sea of tall golden grass waving in the wind like a dry ocean. It looks peaceful. It sounds peaceful. But by now, you know better. In the Ice Age, peaceful usually means ambush. You are crouching low, trying to stay hidden. But concealment here is tricky because the predator hunting you doesn't rely on smell like a wolf or stealth like a cat. It relies on height. It is looking over the grass. Suddenly, a head pops up above the stalks, 20 feet away. It is the size of a horse's head, but it is covered in feathers. It has a hooked beak as big as a human head, bright, terrifyingly yellow, and sharp as a guillotine. It turns, and a large reptilian eye locks onto you. This is Titanus wieleri, or one of its Forus ratsid cousins, the terror bird. When the dinosaurs died out 66 million years ago, they didn't all vanish. The birds survived, and in the isolation of South America, free from the competition of placental mammals, they decided to reclaim their throne. They got big, they stopped flying, and they became the top predators of the continent. Standing nearly 10 feet tall, the terror bird is essentially a T-Rex that has traded its teeth for a beak and its tail for speed. It can run at 40 miles per hour, but it is the way it kills that haunts your nightmares. Most predators bite and hold. A lion grabs your throat and suffocates you. The terror bird doesn't do that. Its neck muscles are incredibly developed, but its beak is relatively narrow. It hunts like an executioner. It runs up to its prey, perhaps a young Macrauchenia or a slow human, raises its head high, and drives that massive hooked beak down in a vertical chopping motion. It is a biological hatchet. It strikes the skull or the spine, shattering bone instantly. It doesn't wrestle you, it deletes you. This is a mainstream historical fact that is often overlooked. Humans in the Americas didn't just fight mammals, they fought dinosaurs. The terror birds are the last scream of the Mesozoic, a lingering echo of the raptors, surviving just long enough to look a human in the eye. But if you manage to escape the avian axe murderer, you are not out of the woods. Because the Great American Biotic Interchange didn't just bring herbivores south, it brought the cats. And in the rich, protein-filled environment of South America, the sabertooth cat decided to go to the gym. Meet Smilodon populator. You might know its North American cousin, Smilodon fetalis. That cat was big, about the size of a modern lion. But Smilodon populator? It was a freak of nature. It weighed nearly 1,000 pounds. That is twice the weight of a lion. It is the largest cat to ever walk the earth. Its upper canines were 11 inches long. They extended below its jawline even when its mouth was closed. But here is the quirky tidbit about those terrifying teeth. They were actually incredibly fragile. They were oval in cross-section, like knives, not round like spikes. If the cat bit into a struggling bone, the teeth could snap. So, Smilodon had to be a wrestler. Its front legs were absurdly thick, built for raw, overpowering grappling. The strategy was simple. Tackle the prey to the ground, pin it with massive forearms so it couldn't move a muscle, and then deliver a precise, surgical bite to the throat. The teeth went in like a double dagger strike, severing the carotid arteries and windpipe instantly. It was a precision kill delivered by a bulldozer. So how on earth did early humans survive this? You are a slow, soft primate, armed with a pointy stick, caught between a giant bird that wants to chop you and a giant cat that wants to stab you. The answer lies in the rocks. Travel with me to the Serra da Capivara National Park in Brazil. Here, hidden under rocky overhangs, is the Sistine Chapel of the Americas. The walls are covered in thousands of paintings, some dating back possibly 20,000 years or more. And here is our scientific evidence. Among the scenes of dancing rituals and hunting parties, there is a painting of a massive, domed creature with a small head. It is unmistakably a glyptodon, the giant armadillo we met earlier. But surrounding it are tiny stick figures. Humans. This proves that we didn't just find their bones later. We saw them alive. We stood in their shadow. And the fact that we are painting them implies we were observing them, perhaps hunting them, or at least surviving them. The art shows a relationship. We weren't just prey, we were participants in this ecosystem. But there is a fierce, open, scholarly debate about the timing of all this. Some archaeologists argue that humans arrived in South America very early, maybe 30,000 years ago, and lived alongside these monsters for thousands of years in a balanced state of terror. Others argue for a blitzkrieg model, where humans arrived late, around 13,000 years ago, and immediately wiped out the megafauna. Did we burn the tall grass to drive the terror birds into traps? Did we steal the kills of the smilodon while it was sleeping off a meal? Or did we just hide in the caves, painting the monsters we were too afraid to fight? Whatever the strategy, the result is clear. The terror birds are gone, the smilodon is gone, the glyptodon is gone. We are still here. But the Americas were not the only isolated laboratory of giants. Across the Pacific Ocean, there is another landmass that has been separated from the rest of the world for even longer. A land where mammals never really took charge, and something else, something with a pouch, rose to power. We are heading to the burning continent. We are going to Sahul. And if you thought the terror bird was bad, wait until you meet the lizard that eats it. You are wet, you are exhausted, and you are standing on a beach that shouldn't exist. You have just done something that no primate has ever done in the history of the Earth. You have crossed the Wallace Line. You have built a raft, perhaps of bamboo, perhaps of reeds, and navigated 50 miles of open ocean to reach a dark shape on the horizon. You have left the familiar world of Asia behind and stepped onto the continent of Sahul. Today we call it Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania. But back then, lower sea levels glued them into one massive, dry, sun-baked supercontinent. The silence here is different. The birds sing songs you've never heard. The trees, eucalyptus mostly, smell like medicine and oil. And the animals? They are wrong. They don't have hooves. They don't have placentas. They have pouches. You have entered the kingdom of the marsupials. And just like in the Americas, the isolation here has brewed some true monsters. Walk inland. The heat is oppressive, a physical weight on your shoulders. In the scrubland ahead, you see a shape that defies physics. It looks like a wombat, that cute, burrowing fuzzball from modern zoos. But this wombat is the size of a hippopotamus. This is Diprotodon. It stands 6 feet tall at the shoulder and weighs nearly 3 tons. It is the largest marsupial to ever live. It lumbers through the salt bush, munching on rough vegetation with the enthusiasm of a giant industrial mulcher. It looks almost comical, a giant furry potato on legs. It has no claws to speak of, no fangs. It seems like the perfect, slow-moving buffet for a hungry tribe of sapiens who have just paddled across the ocean. But don't let the cuddly appearance fool you. In the animal kingdom, big usually means grumpy. If you startle a 3-ton wombat, it will charge you, and it will flatten you. But the Diprotodon isn't the thing that keeps you awake at night in Sahul. It's what eats the Diprotodon. High above you, in the branches of a gum tree, something is watching. It has the body of a leopard, but the face of a pug dog. This is Thylacoleo carnifex, the marsupial lion. Despite the name, it is not a lion. It's actually a cousin of the koala. But imagine a koala that has traded its eucalyptus leaves for murder. It has the strongest bite force, pound for pound, of any mammal predator in history. But here is the quirky tidbit that makes it a biological freak. It doesn't have canine teeth. It doesn't have those long fangs that tigers or wolves have. Instead, it has evolved its front buck teeth, incisors, into jagged, pointed daggers, and its cheek teeth into massive bolt-cutter blades called carnassials. It doesn't stab, it snips. It can bite through a kangaroo's femur like you bite through a carrot. Getty Images. And it gets worse. On its thumb, it has a retractable claw that is like a grappling hook. The leading theory is that Thylacoleo was an ambush predator that dropped from the trees onto the backs of its prey, a prehistoric reality behind the modern Aussie myth of the drop bear. It would latch on with those thumb hooks and deliver a single spine-severing crunch with its bolt-cutter mouth. But even the marsupial lion has to give way to the true lord of this continent. In the Americas, the dinosaurs were represented by birds. Here, the reptile lineage never really gave up. Emerging from the dry riverbed is a lizard. But it's not a Komodo dragon. It's bigger, much bigger. This is Megalania, or Varanus priscus. It is 20 feet long. It weighs as much as a cart horse. It is the largest terrestrial lizard to ever exist. It is, for all intents and purposes, a dragon without wings. Its teeth are serrated like steak knives and curved backward so that once it bites you, you can't pull a boar. And recent scientific evidence from its modern cousins suggests it was almost certainly venomous. A bite from Megalania would not only cause massive blood loss, but would inject a cocktail of toxins that prevent clotting and send the victim into shock. It didn't need to kill you instantly, it just needed to bite you once, and then leisurely follow your scent trail until you collapsed. So, here you are. The first human invaders. You are small, soft, and carrying wooden spears against venomous dragons and bolt-cutter koalas. How did you survive? You didn't just survive, you changed the continent. This brings us to one of the most contentious, open scholarly debates in Australian archaeology, the fire stick farming hypothesis. When humans arrived in Australia roughly 50,000 to 65,000 years ago, the fossil record shows a rapid crash in the megafauna. Within a few thousand years, the Diprotodon, the Thylacoleo, and the Megalania were all gone. Some argue it was climate change. Australia was drying out. But the climate had dried out before, and the giants had survived. The only new variable was us. The theory goes that the first Australians realized they couldn't fight these monsters one-on-one, so they used the ultimate weapon, fire. They systematically burned patches of scrubland. This did two things. First, it drove the game into ambushes, a fire drive. Second, and more importantly, it cleared the old, dry, inedible undergrowth and encouraged the growth of fresh, green grass, which attracted kangaroos and emus, prey that was easier to manage than a 3-ton wombat. By burning the landscape, humans engineered a new ecosystem. We turned Australia from a mosaic of dry forests into a continent of fire-adapted grasslands. We literally terraformed the place. The scientific evidence for this is found in sediment cores from the bottom of the ocean off the coast of Queensland. We see a sudden spike in charcoal deposits around 45,000 years ago, coinciding with the arrival of humans. At the same time, the pollen counts for fire-sensitive trees drop, and the pollen for fire-resistant eucalyptus skyrockets. We burned the dragons out of their homes. We starved the giants. The extinction of the Australian megafauna was the first clear signal that Homo sapiens had become geological force. We were no longer just living in the world. We were consuming it. The silence returns to the outback. The ground-shaking thud of the Diprotodon is gone, replaced by the rhythmic thump of the kangaroo. The dragon is dead. The drop bear is a myth. The humans have won Sahul, but the conquest isn't over. There is one more continent of giants left, one more arena where the megafauna are still blissfully unaware that the destroyer has arrived. We must leave the burning gum trees of Australia and head back north, across the ice, to the land of the wide open sky. We are going to America. But this time, we are entering the heartland. We are going to the Wild West, where the buffalo roam, and where something much, much scarier is waiting to chase them. You are standing in the middle of Wilshire Boulevard in downtown Los Angeles, but there is no traffic, no smog, and definitely no movie stars. There is only a vast, sun-drenched savanna dotted with oak trees and sagebrush. The air smells of tar and sage. Welcome to the North American Serengeti. If you thought Africa had a monopoly on cool safari animals, think again. The ecosystem you are standing in is arguably more diverse and more majestic. And here is a mainstream historical fact that might win you a bar bet. You are looking at herds of camels and horses. Most people assume horses are European and camels are Middle Eastern. In reality, both of these iconic animals evolved right here in North America. The ancestors of the modern horse, Equus, and the camel, Camelops, spent millions of years grazing on the American plains before they migrated over the Bering Land Bridge to Asia. When the Spanish conquistadors rode their horses into the Americas in the 1500s, the indigenous people were terrified of these alien beasts. But biologically speaking, the horses were just coming home. As you watch a herd of Camelops hesternus, which look like dromedaries on steroids, standing 7 feet tall at the shoulder, you notice they are nervous. They have reason to be. The ground shakes, not with the thud of a mammoth, but with the rapid, pounding stride of a nightmare. Bursting from the tree line is Arctodus simus, the giant, short-faced bear. If you encounter a grizzly bear today, you are supposed to play dead. If you encounter a short-faced bear, you are just dead. This animal is a biological contradiction. It is built like a bear, but it has the legs of a marathon runner. While modern bears have shorter hind legs that give them a sloping, lumbering gait, Arctodus has long, straight limbs of equal length. It stands 6 feet tall at the shoulder on all fours. If it decides to stand up on its hind legs to check the wind, it towers over 12 feet high, tall enough to look into a second-story window without standing on its tiptoes. But it's the face that haunts you. It doesn't have the long, dog-like snout of a black bear. Its face is smashed in, short and broad, like a bulldog's. This short muzzle allows for a terrifyingly wide bite and immense crushing power. This brings us to a fierce, open, scholarly debate regarding this monster. Was it a super predator or a super bully? Some paleontologists argue that its long legs were built for running down horses in a high-speed chase. Others argue that its limbs were too spindly for sharp turns, and that it was actually a kleptoparasite. The theory is that Arctodus didn't hunt. It just let the lions and wolves do the work, then walked in, stood up to its full 12-foot height, and said, "That's mine." In the Pleistocene economy, size was the ultimate currency, and Arctodus was the richest guy in the room. But even the king of the bears has a weakness, and for the animals of ancient California, that weakness is hiding in plain sight. Walk a few miles west to the area that will one day be Hancock Park. You smell it before you see it, the acrid stench of asphalt. Bubbling up from fissures in the ground is sticky, black crude oil. This is the La Brea tar pits. To an animal, this looks like a watering hole. The crude oil is often covered by a thin layer of rainwater. A thirsty mammoth wanders in for a drink. It steps into the water, and its foot sinks into the goo. It tries to pull back, but the tar holds fast. It struggles. And here is the horror of the trap. The struggle attracts attention. The distress cries of a trapped mammoth are a dinner bell. A pack of wolves hears it. A sabertooth cat hears it. They rush in for an easy meal. They jump onto the mammoth's back, but then they slip. They fall into the tar. Now, instead of one trapped animal, you have 5. Then a vulture lands to eat the wolf and gets stuck. It is a pyramid scheme of death. Thanks to this sticky graveyard, La Brea is one of the most important scientific sites on Earth. It has given us millions of fossils, perfectly preserved in asphalt, stained a dark chocolate brown. And the most common fossil pulled from the pits isn't the mammoth or the tiger, it's the dire wolf. Here is your quirky tidbit for the section. The dire wolf, Anocleondirus, isn't just a fantasy creature for stark children in Game of Thrones. It was a very real, very heavy animal. While it wasn't the size of a pony like in the show, sorry to disappoint, it was significantly bulkier than a modern grey wolf. It had a larger head and massive teeth designed for cracking bone. But the most interesting thing the tar pits tell us is about their hearts, not their teeth. We find so many dire wolves in the pits, thousands of them, that it proves they were pack hunters. But even more touching, we find fossils of dire wolves that had survived terrible injuries, broken legs, smashed jaws, that had healed before they died in the tar. This is scientific evidence of altruism. A lone wolf with a broken leg dies. A wolf that survives a broken leg for months implies that its pack waited for it. They shared food with it. They protected it. Even in the brutal, tar-stained violence of the Ice Age, loyalty existed. So, the North American stage is set. You have horses returning home. You have bulldog bears stealing kills. You have wolves that care for their crippled. It is a vibrant, violent, and deafeningly loud ecosystem. But into this land of giants steps a new predator. He is smaller than the bear. He is slower than the wolf. He has no fangs. But he has something the others don't. He has a second skin. He has figured out how to steal the warmth of other animals to survive the cold that is killing them. We are about to look at the technology that saved us. It wasn't the spear that conquered the north. It was the sewing kit. You are standing in the middle of a blizzard in what is now Siberia. The temperature is hovering around -30 degrees. At this temperature, exposed skin freezes in minutes. Your breath turns to ice crystals instantly. You are a tropical primate. By all laws of biology, you should be a corpsicle. You don't have the blubber of a seal. You don't have the dense, double-layered fur of a woolly rhino. You are naked, sweaty, and fragile. And yet, you are not only alive, you are comfortable. You are hunting. You are laughing. How? Because you have cheated. You have stolen the skins of the animals you killed, and more importantly, you have reassembled them using a piece of technology that is arguably more important than the wheel, the spear, or the fire. It is a sliver of bone, no longer than your finger, with a tiny hole drilled in one end. The eyed needle. This brings us to a mainstream historical fact that is hard to wrap your head around. The invention of the eyed needle, roughly 20,000 to 30,000 years ago, was the space program of the Paleolithic. Before the needle, clothing was just a blanket. You could kill a bear, scrape the hide, and drape it over your shoulders like a cape. That works fine if you are sitting by a fire or if you are a Neanderthal with a furnace for a metabolism. But in the high Arctic, a cape is a death sentence. As you move, the heavy fur flaps open. The freezing wind rushes in, hits your sweaty skin, and steals your body heat in seconds. This is called the bellows effect. The eyed needle changed the physics of survival. It allowed us to do something radical. Tailoring. With a needle and thread, made from animal sinew, you could sew 2 pieces of leather together to create a sealed seam. You could make pants. You could make a tunic that fits tight at the wrists and the neck. You could create a hood. By sealing the gaps, you trap a layer of warm air between your skin and the leather. You are walking around in a personal, portable, tropical environment. a microclimate. You are literally carrying Africa with you into the Arctic. This led to the invention of the anorak. This isn't just a jacket, it's a masterpiece of thermal engineering. The fur on the hood breaks the wind, creating a pocket of still air in front of your face so you don't freeze your lungs. The layers can be vented if you get too hot running down a mammoth, preventing sweat, which kills you if it freezes, from soaking your base layer. We have concrete scientific evidence for this revolution. In the Denisova cave in Siberia and in Solutrian sites across Europe, archaeologists have found delicate needles carved from bird bone and mammoth ivory shutterstock. These aren't crude tools, they are polished, precise, and identical in function to the steel needle in your sewing kit today. The fact that someone spent hours crafting this tool tells us that clothing wasn't an afterthought. It was a survival imperative. But how do we know when we started wearing clothes? Leather rots. We rarely find ancient jackets. So scientists had to get creative. They looked at the DNA of one of our oldest, most annoying companions, the louse. Here is your quirky tidbit for the section. The history of fashion is written in the genome of head lice. There are two types of lice that live on humans: head lice, which cling to hair, and body lice, which cling to clothing. They are distinct species. Geneticists realized that body lice could only evolve after we invented clothing, because otherwise they would have nowhere to live. By measuring the genetic divergence between the two groups, they calculated that body lice split off from head lice roughly 170,000 years ago. This suggests we were wrapping up in furs long before the Ice Age peaked, but the needle turned those wraps into high-tech survival suits. This technology created a stark divide between us and our cousins. This leads to a fascinating open scholarly debate. Did Neanderthals have tailored clothes? Most experts say no. We find scrapers in Neanderthal sites for cleaning hides, but we generally don't find needles. Their anatomy, those short, heat-retaining limbs, might have meant they didn't need complex clothing as much as we did. A simple fur cape and leg wrappings might have been enough for them. But for the gracile, lanky sapiens, tailoring was the only way to survive. It's a sobering thought. The Neanderthal relied on his biology to stay warm. The sapiens relied on his technology. When the climate grew even colder during the last glacial maximum, biology hit a limit. But technology didn't. We just sewed tighter seams. We added another layer. We adapted faster than our DNA could ever keep up. So you are standing on the step, warm in your tailored mammoth skin parka, boots sealed with beeswax, watching the snow fall. You have conquered the cold. You have turned the skins of your enemies into a fortress for your body. But there is one more barrier to overcome. You are a hunter, yes, but you are slow. You can't outrun a horse. You can't smell a reindeer from a mile away. You are blind in the dark. To truly dominate this landscape, you need to borrow the senses of another predator. You need a partner. And out in the darkness, watching your fire with glowing yellow eyes, is a creature that is thinking the exact same thing. You are sitting by your fire, gnawing on a reindeer bone. The wind is howling outside your mammoth hide tent, but you are warm. You toss the bone over your shoulder into the darkness. Usually this is where the story ends. The bone rots, or a hyena steals it. But tonight, the darkness crunches back. You see a pair of yellow eyes reflecting the firelight. It's a wolf. Your hand instinctively goes to your spear. For thousands of years, this animal has been your arch-nemesis. You occupy the exact same ecological niche. You both hunt reindeer, you both hunt bison, you both live in packs. In the brutal math of the Ice Age, every calorie the wolf eats is a calorie you don't. You should kill it, but you don't. This wolf isn't growling, it isn't charging, it's waiting. It creeps forward, tail low, ears back, a posture of submission. It takes the bone, cracks it, and stays just at the edge of the light. This moment is the beginning of the most successful alliance in the history of life on Earth. It is the moment we invented the dog. This brings us to a fierce, open, scholarly debate regarding how this happened. The old story was that a hunter grabbed a wolf puppy, brought it home, and raised it. But let's be real. Have you ever tried to train a wild wolf? They are neurotic, aggressive, and terrified of humans. The puppy snatch theory is unlikely. The leading theory today is self-domestication, or the campfire scavenger hypothesis. The idea is that we didn't choose the wolves chose us. Some wolves were naturally less fearful and less aggressive, lower cortisol levels. These bold wolves discovered that hanging around human camps was an easier way to get calories than chasing an elk for 10 miles. They essentially domesticated themselves to access our trash. Over generations, the wolves that were friendlier got more bones. They bred with other friendly wolves. Their adrenaline levels dropped. And as a side effect of this chemical change, their bodies changed. Their ears became floppy. Their tails curled. Their coats developed patches of white. Their snouts got shorter. The wolf melted into the dog. But this wasn't just about cute companions. This was a military contract. Think about the strengths of a human hunter. We have ranged weapons. We can kill from a distance. But we are slow, and our sense of smell is pathetic. Now think about a wolf. They are fast. They have a nose that can smell a drop of blood in a snowstorm. But to kill, they have to get close and bite, which is dangerous. When you combine the two, you get a biological superweapon. The dog tracks the prey and herds it, nipping at its heels, holding it in place. The human walks up and delivers the killing thrust with a spear, risk-free. Then, they share the meat. It is the perfect symbiosis. We have staggering archaeological evidence of this teamwork at a site in France called Solutré. At the foot of a steep limestone cliff, the Rock of Solutré, archaeologists found a layer of bones that defies belief. It contains the remains of over 100,000 horses. Layer upon layer of butchered carcasses accumulated over thousands of years. Think about the logistics of that. How do you drive a herd of wild, panicked horses off a trap or into a cul-de-sac on that scale? You can't do it with just people. The horses would scatter. They would break the line. To control a herd that size, you need a living fence. You need dogs. The theory is that sapiens used packs of domesticated wolf dogs to coordinate these massive drives, turning the hunt from a chaotic scramble into an industrial slaughter. This surplus of meat allowed our populations to explode, while the Neanderthals, who almost certainly did not have dogs, were left chasing rabbits one by one. We even have the physical proof of this transition. In the Altai Mountains of Siberia, scientists found a skull that is 33,000 years old. It looks like a wolf, but not quite. The snout is shorter. The teeth are crowded, a sign that the jaw is shrinking faster than the teeth, a classic trait of domestication. This is the Altai dog. It suggests that long before we invented agriculture or cities, we had already invited another species into our family. This alliance changed us too. There is a quirky tidbit of neuroscience that suggests looking into a dog's eyes releases oxytocin, the love hormone, in both the human and the dog. This is a feedback loop usually reserved for mothers and infants. We literally hacked each other's emotional software. We were no longer alone in the dark. When the sapiens hunter laid down to sleep on the freezing tundra, he had a living heater curled up next to him. A three-dog night isn't just a phrase, it was a survival strategy. And while he slept, he had a sentry that could hear a twig snap 100 yards away. The Neanderthals never stood a chance. They were fighting a war against a combined arms force. human intelligence backed by wolf senses. But as our bellies filled with horse meat and our camps became safer thanks to our barking guards, our minds began to drift. We weren't just surviving anymore. We had time to think. We had time to dream. And in the deep, crushing blackness of the limestone caves, we began to do something that had no survival value at all. We began to paint. You are leaving the noise of the camp behind, the barking dogs, the cracking bones, the chatter of the tribe. You are walking up a limestone slope to a small, dark fissure in the earth. You light a torch made of juniper wood and animal fat. It sputters, casting a smoky orange light. Then, you squeeze inside. You are entering the underworld. We often think of cavemen living in caves. And sure, they lived in the mouths of caves, where there was light and ventilation. But they didn't live here. You have crawled nearly a mile underground. The air is stale and cold. The silence is absolute. It is a sensory deprivation tank that amplifies the sound of your own heartbeat until it sounds like a drum. The darkness outside your torchlight is so thick it feels like a solid wall. Why are you here? You aren't hiding from a bear. You aren't looking for water. You are here to hallucinate. You reach a large chamber, the walls glistening with calcite crystals. You raise your torch, and suddenly, the rock comes alive. Getty images. Galloping across the ceiling are horses, lions, bison, and rhinos. But these aren't just stick figures. They are masterpieces of perspective and shading. The artist has used the natural bulge of the rock to give the bison a 3D belly. They have used charcoal for the outlines and red ochre for the fur, spitting the pigment out of their mouths to create a soft, airbrushed effect. And look closely at that bison. It doesn't have 4 legs. It has 8. For years, archaeologists thought this was a mistake, a double exposure, where the artist messed up and drew over an old painting. But bring your torch closer. Move the light back and forth quickly. Under the flickering flame, the extra legs disappear and reappear in sequence. The bison isn't standing still, it's running. This is proto-cinema. By painting multiple frames of movement on top of each other and viewing them by flickering firelight, your ancestors created the world's first animation. In the pitch black of the cave, these animals seemed to breathe, to move, to stampede. It was a magic show. It was a virtual reality experience designed to overwhelm the senses. But why go to all this trouble? The old theory was hunting magic. You paint a bison so you can kill a bison. A spiritual shopping list. But that theory falls apart when you realize that the animals they painted, lions, bears, rhinos, were rarely the ones they ate. Reindeer. You don't hunt a cave lion for dinner. You fear it. This art wasn't a menu. It was a way of processing trauma. The Ice Age was a world of constant, low-level terror. By going into the dark and painting the monsters, perhaps you were taking ownership of them. You were capturing their souls on the wall, so they couldn't hurt you in the night. But there is a weirder layer to this. Look between the animals. You see dots, lines, triangles, zigzags. These abstract signs appear in caves all over the world, from France to Indonesia, and they are surprisingly consistent. They look like code. This brings us to a fierce, open, scholarly debate. Were they high? Deep caves often have poor air circulation. If you bring a burning torch in here, it eats the oxygen and releases carbon dioxide. This creates hypoxia, oxygen deprivation. The symptoms of hypoxia include dizziness, euphoria, and hallucinations. Specifically, the brain starts to generate entoptic phenomena, geometric patterns like grids, dots, and spirals. Is it possible that the great cathedrals of the Stone Age were actually just hot boxes? Did the shamans crawl down here, starve their brains of oxygen, and paint the visions that floated across their retinas? It suggests that religion didn't start with a book. It started with a trip. But it wasn't just the shamans. And this is the part that breaks my heart every time I read about it. In the soft clay floor of the cave of Toba in France, we found footprints. Small ones. They belong to a child, maybe 3 or 4 years old. And next to them, we see finger flutings, long wavy lines drawn into the wet clay of the ceiling. The height of the lines matches the height of a child being held up on a parent's shoulders. This implies that you didn't come down here alone. You brought your kids. Imagine that. Taking a toddler a mile underground, past terrifying drop-offs and squeeze points, into the absolute dark. Why? To initiate them. To show them the secrets. To let them press their tiny hand against the wall, blow paint over it, and leave a negative handprint. A signature that says, "I was here. I existed." Getty Images. Those handprints are the most haunting legacy of the Ice Age. Most of them, by the way, belong to women, based on the ratio of finger lengths. They are waving at us from 30,000 years ago. They are shouting across the abyss of time, demanding to be remembered. The cave was the womb of the human mind. It was where we went to face the darkness, both outside and inside ourselves. It was where we forged the myths that held our tribes together. But the Ice Age human couldn't stay in the womb forever. The world was calling. The herds were moving. And to the east, across the endless steppe, a door was opening that had been locked for 100,000 years. You extinguish your torch. You crawl back out into the blinding white light of the tundra. You gather your tribe, your dogs, and your tailored coats. You are about to take the longest walk in human history. You are going to walk until the land runs out, and then you are going to keep walking. You keep walking east. The sun rises ahead of you, illuminating a landscape that shouldn't be there. According to the maps you learned in school, this should be the Bering Strait, a churning stretch of freezing ocean separating Russia from Alaska. But the ocean is gone. In its place is a flat, golden plain stretching as far as the eye can see. This is Beringia. It is crucial that you stop thinking of this as a bridge. A bridge is something you cross to get to the other side. This is a subcontinent. It is 1,000 miles wide, roughly the size of Australia. It has its own weather patterns, its own rivers, and its own ecosystem of dry, wind-blown steppe. You aren't just crossing it, you are trapped on it. To your south is the Pacific Ocean, its coastline miles away from where it is today. To your north is the Arctic Ocean. But to your east, the way forward, is a wall. The Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets have smashed together, forming a barricade of ice 2 miles high that blocks entry into North America. You can't go back to Siberia, too cold, too crowded, and you can't go forward. So you settle down. This brings us to the Beringian standstill hypothesis. For a long time, we thought the first Americans just sprinted across the bridge and kept going. But genetics tells a different story. The DNA of Native Americans is distinct from East Asians. The mutation rate suggests that a population of roughly 10,000 to 20,000 people got stuck in Beringia and lived there in isolation for perhaps 5,000 to 10,000 years. This was the incubator. It was here, in the shadow of the Great Ice Wall, that the unique genetic markers of the indigenous peoples of the Americas were forged. You survived on salmon, seal, and mammoth. You burned bone for heat. You waited for the world to change. And then it did. The ice began to crack. Two paths opened up, and historians are still arguing over which one you took. The classic story, the one in all the old textbooks, is the ice-free corridor. The theory goes that as the planet warmed slightly, the two massive ice sheets pulled apart, creating a narrow, muddy valley running down the spine of Canada. It would have been a grim journey, a biological wind tunnel flanked by walls of blue ice, with freezing wind screaming down the middle. It was long thought to be the only way in. But there is a new theory, and it smells like seaweed. It's called the Kelp Highway. Imagine you have a boat. Nothing fancy, just a skin boat. A kayak. Instead of walking through the hellish corridor inland, you hug the coast. The glaciers don't block the ocean. You paddle along the edge of the ice, hopping from one small ice-free island to the next. This route is a sushi conveyor belt. The kelp forests are teeming with fish, sea urchins, seals, and otters. You don't need to hunt dangerous mammoths. You just need to drop a line. You can travel fast. This theory explains how humans reached the tip of South America, Monteverde in Chile, so quickly, thousands of years before the ice-free corridor was even fully open. But just when we thought we had the timeline figured out, the ground in New Mexico decided to speak up. Travel with me to White Sands National Park. In 2021, archaeologists made a discovery that hit the scientific community like a meteor. In the dry, alkali flats of an ancient lake bed, they found footprints. These aren't vague depressions. They are crystal clear. You can see the toes. You can see the heel strikes. They were made by teenagers and children, likely splashing in the mud on the edge of the water. But the bombshell is the dating. By analyzing ancient ditch grass seeds embedded in the tracks, they dated these prints to roughly 23,000 years ago. This is a massive problem for the timeline. 23,000 years ago was the last glacial maximum, the absolute height of the Ice Age. The ice sheets were fully locked. The corridor was closed. If people were in New Mexico 23,000 years ago, they didn't wait for the ice to melt. They didn't wait for the corridor. They must have arrived much, much earlier, perhaps surfing down the coast before the ice sheets even reached their maximum extent. It suggests that the Americas weren't empty. While the Beringians were stuck in the incubator up north, there might have been a ghost population already living deep in the continent, leaving footprints that would wait eons to be found. Here is a quirky tidbit that adds a poignant layer to those footprints. In one trackway at White Sands, you can see a set of adult prints walking in a straight line. Occasionally, a set of toddler prints appears inside the adult prints, then disappears again. The story is clear. A parent was carrying a tired child, putting them down for a bit, then picking them up again. It's a moment of parenting that is universally recognizable, frozen in stone for 23,000 years. Regardless of when you arrived, the moment you step off the ice and onto the unglaciated land of North America, the world changes. The wind is warmer. The smell of sagebrush fills the air, and the ground vibrates with the movement of animals that have never seen a human being. You are an invasive species. This is a harsh term, but it's accurate. When rabbits were introduced to Australia, they devastated the ecosystem because nothing knew how to eat them. When humans were introduced to the Americas, we were the ultimate biological weapon. We were a predator that the local prey didn't understand. The animals here, the camels, the ground sloths, the mammoths, didn't evolve with us. In Africa, the animals co-evolved with humans for millions of years. A zebra knows that a hairless ape with a stick is dangerous. But an American mastodon? It looks at you and sees a harmless, slow-moving curiosity. It doesn't run. It watches. This ecological naivety is about to lead to one of the greatest vanishing acts in history. You have just walked into a buffet that has no security guards, and you are starving. You are standing in a field of blood. I don't mean to be dramatic, but there is no other way to describe what is happening. For the last few sections, we have talked about the struggle, the cold, and the starvation that defined human existence. But as you step into the Americas, the script flips. You are no longer the underdog. You are the asteroid. This is the era of the Great Slaughter. Imagine walking up to a creature the size of a school bus. A mastodon. In Africa, an elephant would smell you, flare its ears, and charge or flee. It knows what a human is. It has millions of years of genetic memory that says 2 legs equals trouble. But here, the mastodon just looks at you. It blinks its long lashes. It has never seen an ape before. To this giant, you are just a weird, hairless badger standing on its hind legs. It doesn't perceive a threat. This is the concept of ecological naivety, also known as the dodo effect. But instead of happening on a small island, it is happening on a massive, double-continent scale. You walk up to the mastodon. You thrust your spear into its flank. It screams, not in anger, but in confusion. It doesn't know how to fight you because it doesn't know it's in a war. This sets the stage for one of the most famous and controversial theories in paleontology, the overkill hypothesis, often called the Blitzkrieg model. Proposed by scientist Paul Martin, this theory suggests that humans swept through the Americas like a biological wildfire. The math is terrifying. If a band of 100 humans moves south, killing just slightly more animals than they need to survive, and their population doubles every generation because the food is so plentiful, they could theoretically wipe out the megafauna of both North and South America in as little as 1,000 years. It explains why the extinction event is so sharp. One moment in the fossil record, you have camels, horses, ground sloths, mammoths, mastodons, short-faced bears, and saber-toothed cats. Then a thin layer of sediment later, coinciding exactly with the arrival of human stone tools, they are all gone. Roughly 70% of North American genera weighing over 100 pounds vanished. We have the smoking gun. For a long time, critics said, maybe they just died of disease? Maybe we just scavenged them. But then we found the Manis mastodon site in Washington state. Here is the scientific evidence that puts the weapon in your hand. Embedded in the rib of a mastodon is a point made of bone. It's not just lying next to the rib. The bone of the rib had grown around the point, meaning the animal was shot, survived, healed, and was likely hunted again later. We have also found Clovis stone points lodged directly into the vertebrae of mammoths. These aren't scavenging tools. These are weapons of war. But this isn't an open and shut case. Historians and climatologists still argue fiercely whether overkill is the whole story. They point to the climate. Remember, the Ice Age is ending. The climate is warming, the vegetation is changing, and the seasons are becoming more extreme. The Great Mammoth Steppe is breaking up, replaced by forests and bogs. The critics argue that the animals were already stressed, their populations plummeting because their habitat was vanishing. Humans might have just delivered the coup de grace, the final kick to an ecosystem that was already dying. However, the climate-only argument has a massive hole in it. The megafauna had survived dozens of glacial-interglacial cycles before. They had weathered the warming and the cooling for millions of years without going extinct. The only thing different about this warming cycle was us. We were the new variable. But if we were such unstoppable killing machines, here is a question that should bother you. Why is the American bison still here? This is the bison paradox. The bison, or buffalo, is a massive, slow-moving herd animal, essentially a hairy cow. It should have been the easiest thing to wipe out. Yet while the horse and the camel vanished, the bison thrived. The answer might lie in their passport. The horse and camel were native to the Americas. They were ecologically naive. The bison, however, was a recent immigrant from Asia. It had crossed the Bering Land Bridge, just like we did. It had evolved alongside humans and wolves in the Old World. It was street smart. It knew that when the hairless apes showed up, it was time to run, stampede, and trample. It survived because it respected the threat. The American natives stood around and got slaughtered. There is a quirky tidbit about this extinction that sits in your refrigerator right now. The avocado. The avocado tree evolved to be eaten by Megafauna. Its seed is massive, too big for a deer or a peccary to swallow. It was designed to be swallowed whole by a giant ground sloth, or a gomphothera, an elephant relative which would walk for miles, poop out the giant seed in a pile of fertilizer, and plant a new tree. When the megafauna died, the avocado should have gone extinct. It had lost its dispersal partner. It is a ghost of evolution. The only reason it survived is that humans decided, hey, this green mush tastes good, and we took over the job of the sloth. We are the reason your guacamole exists. As you walk south, the silence grows. The ground stops shaking. The roar of the short-faced bear is gone. The trumpet of the mastodon fades. In their place is a new sound, the crackle of human fires. We have eaten our way to the bottom of the continent. We have converted the biomass of the giants into the biomass of humans. We are the new masters of the Western Hemisphere. But nature rarely lets a species get too arrogant. Just as we are celebrating our conquest, wiping the mammoth grease off our chins, and settling into this brave new world, the planet decides to remind us that we are not in charge. The climate is about to pull a U-turn so violent that it will freeze the flowers in the fields. The great thaw is a trap. The final boss of the Ice Age is waking up. You are standing in a meadow of wildflowers in what is now Ohio. The year is roughly 13,000 years ago. The sun is warm on your face. The birds are singing. The massive glaciers to the north are retreating, groaning as they melt into puddles. The great thaw is in full swing. Life is good. The mammoths are gone, sure, but the bison are plentiful, and the weather is finally cooperating. You have survived the ice. You have beaten the game. And then, in the span of a single human lifetime, maybe even less, the game decides to reset. The temperature plummets. The warm breeze dies, replaced by a screaming wind from the north that smells of ancient ice. The forests you just watched grow are killed by frost. The glaciers stop retreating and start marching forward again, crushing the land they just vacated. Welcome to the younger dryas. It is the final boss of the Ice Age. Just when humanity thought it was safe to put away the Parkers, the planet was plunged back into a deep freeze that lasted for 1,200 years. It wasn't a slow cooling. It was a climate heart attack. Temperatures in the northern hemisphere dropped by roughly 10 degrees Celsius, 18 degrees Fahrenheit, almost overnight. This period is named after a quirky little flower, the Dryas octopetala. It's a tough, 8-petaled flower that thrives in the rocky, freezing tundra. When scientists dug into the soil layers of this period, they found pollen from this flower everywhere, even in places like Italy that should have been warm. The fact that the entire northern hemisphere was suddenly carpeted in a flower that loves the cold tells us that the apocalypse had returned. But why? Why did the Earth, which was well on its way to a tropical vacation, suddenly slam on the brakes? This brings us to one of the most violent open scholarly debates in modern science. In the red corner, we have the freshwater switch theory. This is the mainstream heavyweight champion. The theory goes like this. As the ice sheets melted, they created a massive lake in North America called Glacial Lake Agassiz. This lake was larger than all the modern Great Lakes combined. It was held back by a dam of ice. One day, that dam broke. Trillions of gallons of fresh water rushed into the North Atlantic Ocean in a catastrophic flood. This fresh water diluted the salty ocean water. Since salt water is dense and sinks, it powers the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, the Gulf Stream, the conveyor belt that brings warm, tropical water north to heat Europe. When the fresh water hit, the conveyor belt stopped. Europe's radiator was turned off instantly. The world froze. But in the blue corner, we have a challenger that sounds like it was written by a Hollywood screenwriter. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Some scientists argue that a flood isn't enough to explain the sheer speed and violence of the cooling, or the massive wildfires that seem to have burned across North America at the exact same time. They suggest that a disintegrating comet, or a swarm of comet fragments, slammed into the Earth's atmosphere roughly 12,800 years ago. It wouldn't have been a single dinosaur-killer rock, but a shotgun blast of airbursts detonating over the ice sheets like thousands of nuclear bombs. This would have melted the ice instantly, causing the flood, set the continent on fire, and thrown enough dust into the air to block the sun. For a long time, this was dismissed as fringe science. But then, proponents started finding something strange in the soil. This is our scientific evidence. The black mat! If you dig down into the earth at over 50 archaeological sites across North America, Belgium, and even Syria, you hit a thin, dark layer of carbon-rich soil dating to exactly 12,800 years ago. Inside this black mat, scientists have found nanodiamonds, microscopic spherules of melted rock, and spikes of platinum, materials that are usually only formed under the extreme pressure and heat of a cosmic impact. Below the black mat you find Clovis spear points and mammoth bones. Above the black mat? Nothing. No Clovis, no mammoths, just a ghost town. Whether it was a comet or a broken dam, the result for your ancestors was the same. Chaos. The Clovis people, the famous big game hunters of North America who made those beautiful fluted stone points, vanish from the record. Their culture disintegrates. The easy life of the great slaughter is over. The survivors are forced to scatter, to adapt, to scrape by in a world that has turned hostile again. This 1,200-year winter was the final exam. It killed off the stragglers. It wiped out the remaining megafauna that had managed to survive the initial human wave. It forced us to become even more efficient, even more ruthless. But like all winters, it had to end. And when the Younger Dryas finally broke roughly 11,700 years ago, it didn't just warm up. It exploded into warmth. The pendulum swung back so hard that it broke the machine. The ice sheets didn't just retreat this time. they collapsed. And as they died, they unleashed a monster that is still haunting our collective memory today. You have survived the ice. Now you have to survive the water. You are standing on the coast of what is now England, looking east toward Europe. For thousands of years, your ancestors have walked across this plain to visit their cousins in the Netherlands. It has been a highway of grass, rivers, and game. But today, the highway is gone. In its place is a churning gray wall of water. The ocean is chasing you. When the younger dryas ended roughly 11,700 years ago, the planet didn't just warm up, it spiked a fever. The massive ice sheets that had covered North America and Scandinavia for millennia collapsed. They didn't melt slowly, dripping like a leaky faucet. They shattered. Billions of tons of ice were dumped into the oceans, and vast lakes of glacial meltwater that had been dammed up behind ice walls suddenly burst free. This is a geological event known as Meltwater Pulse 1A. During this period, sea levels rose at a rate that is terrifying to contemplate. In some centuries, the water came up by 4 meters, over 13 feet. That might not sound like a lot if you live on a mountain, but if you live on the flat coastal plains where most humans lived, it is a catastrophe. It means the coastline isn't just creeping inland, it is sprinting. You could go to sleep in a camp near the beach and wake up with the tide washing through your tent. You could visit a hunting ground one year and come back the next to find it gone forever. The most tragic casualty of this deluge was Doggerland. Remember in Section 3 when we walked across the bottom of the English Channel? That world is now drowning. The rising North Sea is swallowing the great valleys. The hilltops are turning into islands. The islands are turning into sandbanks. And finally, the sandbanks are vanishing beneath the waves. We have a specific, terrifying name for the moment Doggerland finally died. The Storegga Slide. About 8,200 years ago, a massive chunk of the continental shelf off the coast of Norway collapsed. It was an underwater landslide the size of Iceland. This displacement sent a tsunami racing across the North Atlantic. A wall of water, perhaps 20 meters high, slammed into the remaining islands of Doggerland and the coast of Britain. If there were any holdouts left on those low-lying islands, people clinging to the last scraps of their ancestral homeland, they were wiped out in a single afternoon. This was the prehistoric Brexit. Britain was physically severed from Europe, becoming the island we know today. But this wasn't just a European tragedy. Halfway across the world, the continent of Sunderland was being dismantled. The grassy plains connecting Thailand, Java, and Borneo were flooded, creating the shallow seas of Southeast Asia. The indigenous populations there were forced to retreat up the slopes of volcanoes and into the highlands. This global catastrophe brings us to a mainstream historical fact that borders on the mythological. Almost every ancient culture on Earth has a great flood story. You have Noah in the Bible. You have Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh. You have the Gun-Yu flood myth in China. You have flood stories in India, among the Maya, and among the Aboriginal Australians. For a long time, historians dismissed these as metaphorical, symbols of cleansing or divine wrath. But geologists look at Meltwater Pulse 1A and ask, is this a coincidence? Is it possible that these myths are actually fossilized memories? Are they the oral history of a trauma so deep that we have been telling the story of the big water for 10,000 years? When a storyteller says the fountains of the deep burst forth, are they describing the bursting of glacial dams? We even have scientific evidence that lies waiting for us under the waves. This is the field of underwater archaeology, and it is finding the ghost towns of the Mesolithic. Off the coast of the Isle of Wight in the UK, at a site called Boldnor Cliff, divers have found a settlement 11 meters underwater. They found worked timber. They found flint tools. They found string made of plant fibers. And most shockingly, they found DNA evidence of wheat, a crop that shouldn't have been in Britain for another 2,000 years. This means there was a sophisticated trading culture living there right up until the moment the water took them. It's a real-life Atlantis, not built of gold and marble, but of wood and hope, preserved in the cold silt of the ocean floor. The impact of this deluge on the human psyche and human politics was profound. For the first time in history, the world was shrinking. For 100,000 years, if you didn't like your neighbors, you could just walk away. There was always more land, but now the land was disappearing. The coastlines were pushing everyone inland. Imagine the refugees. Thousands of tribes, displaced by the rising water, pushed into the territories of inland tribes. The population density skyrocketed. The hunting grounds became crowded. You couldn't just wander anymore because everywhere you went, someone was already there. This creates a pressure cooker. When you have too many people and not enough land, you have two choices. You can fight for the remaining resources, war, or you can figure out a way to get more food out of the same amount of land. You can stop hunting nature and start hacking it. The trap is set. The climate is warm. The land is crowded. The plants are growing like crazy in the new carbon-rich atmosphere. And a weary sapiens, tired of running from the water and tired of fighting for a deer, looks at a patch of wild wheat and thinks, "What if I just stayed here?" We are about to make the biggest mistake, or the greatest leap, in the history of our species. We are about to invent work. You are standing on a hill overlooking a valley in what is now southeastern Turkey. The year is roughly 10,000 BC. The glaciers are gone. The world is lush, green, and exploding with life. Below you, golden fields of wild wheat and barley wave in the breeze. Gazelles wander through the tall grass. It looks like paradise. It looks like the Garden of Eden. And in many ways it is. But you are about to eat the forbidden fruit, and you are going to get kicked out of paradise forever. This is the beginning of the Holocene. The climate has finally stabilized into the warm, predictable patterns that we know today. And because the weather is so nice, a group of people known as the Natufians decide to do something radical. They stop walking. For 1,000,000 years, your ancestors woke up every morning and asked, "Where is the food?" If the food moved, they moved. But here, the wild grains are so thick, you can harvest a year's supply in 3 weeks. So why leave? The Natufians build stone houses. They brew beer. They bury their dead under the floorboards. They are the first affluent sedentary society. But there is a catch. When you stay in one place, your population explodes. Nomad women have to carry their babies, so they space them out, 1 kid every 4 years. Settled women don't have to carry them. They can have a baby every year. Suddenly, the tribe of 50 becomes a village of 500. Now the wild wheat isn't enough. You have too many mouths to feed. You can't go back to hunting. You've already eaten all the local gazelles, and the neighboring territories are full of other tribes. You are trapped. So you have to make more food. You take the seeds. You clear the land. You plant them. You water them. You weed them. You guard them. Congratulations. You have just invented agriculture, and you have just ruined your life. This brings us to a fierce, open, scholarly debate that was famously summarized by Jared Diamond as the worst mistake in the history of the human race. We are raised to believe that agriculture was a glorious step forward, a liberation from the savage struggle of the wild. But the skeletons tell a different story. If you compare a hunter-gatherer from the Ice Age to an early farmer from the Holocene, the difference is shocking. The hunter is tall, with thick bones and perfect teeth. The farmer is short, shrunken by malnutrition. Their bones show signs of stress fractures from lifting heavy loads. And their mouths, they are a disaster zone. For the first time in history, humans have cavities. The hunter ate a low-sugar, high-protein diet. The farmer eats wheat, and more wheat. The bacteria in your mouth love the sugar from the breakdown of starch, and they rot your teeth out of your head. We find Neolithic skulls where the abscesses in the jaw are so bad they likely caused fatal blood infections. But the damage wasn't just physical, it was social. In the Ice Age, you couldn't be rich. If you killed a mammoth, you had to share it. You couldn't store it for 10 years, and you certainly couldn't carry a pile of gold while chasing a reindeer. Everyone was roughly equal because everyone was equally mobile. But with agriculture, you have a silo. You have a surplus. You can lock the grain up. Suddenly you have haves and have-nots. You have a class of people who own the land and a class of people who work it. You have kings. You have soldiers to protect the king's silo. And eventually, you have slaves to work the fields. And then there is the disease. When you live in a village with 1,000 people and their domesticated animals, pigs, cows, chickens, you are creating a biological petri dish. The viruses jump from the animals to us. Measles, smallpox, flu, tuberculosis. These are Holocene gifts. They didn't exist in the Ice Age. The hunter might get eaten by a lion, but he didn't die of a flu pandemic. Here is a quirky tidbit about the luxury of the farming life. Anthropologists have calculated that a hunter-gatherer in a decent environment works about 15 to 20 hours a week to get all the food they need. The rest of the time is spent sleeping, gossiping, and playing games. The early farmer, they worked from sunrise to sunset, breaking their back in the mud, only to eat a bowl of gruel and die at 30. So why did we do it? Why did we trade the freedom of the steppe for the servitude of the plow? Because we couldn't stop. It's the luxury trap. Agriculture allowed us to feed more people, but it forced us to work harder to keep them alive. Once the population grew, we couldn't go back. We had burned the bridge. We traded quality of life for quantity of life. We became a species of billions, but we lost the individual robustness of the sapiens who conquered the ice. You look down at your hands. They are calloused from the hoe. Your back aches. You look at the wall of the city you are building to keep out the barbarians, the people who still live the old way out in the hills. You are civilized now. You are safe. But deep down, a part of your brain, the part that remembers the mammoth steppe, the open horizon, and the thrill of the hunt, is screaming. We have built a cage and locked ourselves inside. The Ice Age shaped us into the ultimate survivor, but the Holocene turned us into the ultimate worker. And yet, despite the cavities and the kings, we kept building. We built pyramids. We built empires. We built the internet. We are the children of the corn, but the ghost of the glacier is still inside us. We are almost at the end of our journey. We have walked from the savannah to the ice, from the cave to the city. Now, it is time to look in the mirror, one last time. It is time to see what the ice left behind in you. Go ahead, walk into your bathroom and look in the mirror. Really look at the creature staring back at you. You see a modern human, civilized, domestic, perhaps a little tired from a long day of staring at screens. But I see something else. I see a piece of hardware that was designed, tested, and hardened in the forge of the Ice Age. Everything about you, from the way your body handles sugar to the way your brain handles fear, is a survival hack from the Pleistocene. Do you have a sweet tooth? Do you find it impossible to say no to a donut or a soda? Don't blame yourself. Blame the tundra. For 99% of our history, sugar was rare. It was the ultimate energy packet. If an ancestor found a beehive or a patch of ripe berries, the ones who politely ate a little bit died. The ones who gorged themselves until they felt sick survived the winter. You aren't undisciplined. You are running a software program called Eat It All Before the Bear Gets It. The problem is you are running that software in a world of 24-hour convenience stores. Your body is still expecting a famine that never comes, so it stores every spare calorie as fat, preparing you for a trek across the ice that you will never take. Do you suffer from anxiety? Do you lie awake at night worrying about things that haven't happened yet? That isn't a disorder. That is a superpower. On the Mammoth step, the optimist who thought, "I bet that rustling in the grass is just the wind," got eaten by a sabertooth cat. The pessimist who thought, "That rustling is definitely a monster," climbed a tree and survived. We are the descendants of the paranoid. Your anxiety is just your inner sentry standing guard, scanning for threats in a world where the only predators left are emails and deadlines. And look at your skin, your hair, your immune system. If you carry those Neanderthal genes we talked about, you are walking around with a biological shield gifted to you by a lost species. We are a mosaic. We are the sum total of every freezing night, every starving winter, and every desperate migration our ancestors survived. But what about the ice itself? Is it gone? Technically, no. Remember, we are just in an interglacial. If nature were left to its own devices, the celestial clockwork would eventually turn. The wobble would shift, the summers would cool, and the glaciers would return to reclaim New York, London, and Berlin. In fact, according to the Milankovitch cycles, we should be slowly sliding toward the next deep freeze right now. But we aren't. We have done something that no species, not the mammoth, not the bacterial mats of the primordial slime, has ever done. We have broken the cycle. By burning the fossilized remains of the Carboniferous forests, coal and oil, we have pumped enough carbon dioxide into the atmosphere to cancel the next ice age. We have turned up the thermostat. We have essentially taken control of the planet's climate control system, but we are driving it like a teenager who stole their dad's car. Fast, reckless, and without a map. We are now the fire makers on a planetary scale. The ice shaped us, but now we are shaping the ice. We are melting the poles. We are raising the oceans. We are creating a new geological epoch, the Anthropocene. The question is no longer, how do we survive the cold? It is, how do we survive ourselves? The Ice Age made us human. It forced us to cooperate. It forced us to invent. It forced us to care for the old and the weak. It stripped away the arrogance of the ape and replaced it with the ingenuity of the survivor. Now, as we stand on the brink of a new, hot, uncertain future, we would do well to remember where we came from. We are the children of winter. We are the ones who walked through the whiteout. We are the ones who kept the fire burning when the whole world turned dark. And if we could survive the monsters, the volcanoes, and the freezing dark, perhaps we can survive this too. The fire is dying down now. The embers are glowing a dull, pulsing red, fading into grey ash. The wind outside the cave has stopped its howling, settling into a gentle, rhythmic whisper against the stone. The mammoths are gone. The sabertooth cats are ghosts in the tar. The great sheets of blue ice that once crushed the continents have retreated to the poles, sleeping giants waiting for a wake-up call that may never come. You don't have to walk anymore. You don't have to scan the horizon for the silhouette of a bear. You don't have to worry if the wood will last the night. You are safe. The long migration is over. You have crossed the bridge, you have climbed the wall, and you have found your place in the warmth. Let the tension drain from your shoulders. Let the vigilance fade from your mind. The sentry can stand down now. The story of the struggle is finished, written in the scars on our bones and the code in our blood. It is a story of impossible odds, of narrow escapes, and of a stubborn refusal to let the light go out. But tonight, the only thing you need to do is rest. The darkness is not a threat anymore. It is a blanket. Pull it up close. Let the silence of history wrap around you. The ancestors are watching, and they are proud. You made it.